which is really, we have a small group today, which is great, so that we can have some good conversation and some dialogue. I would certainly suggest that everyone take a moment to finish off whatever it is that you might be working on, whether it's some emails or some messaging, just to make sure that you are able to be fully present in this particular session, in order to help you get best prepared for your CPC exam. And so I see Stacy and Rudolph and Kevin. Certainly I do invite, because we are such a small group, I do welcome and invite those to have their cameras on if accessible and if possible, just so I know that you're there as well. And because we are a small group, I'm really going to ask for all of you, all three of you right now, to contribute to the conversation, just to make this session as enriching and as possible. And so just to introduce myself, again, my name is Jill Cantor. I had been in the recruitment industry for exactly 20 years. The company I had been with, I had recently left the organization to pursue my own coaching and consulting. I had been with them for 20 years, a company called Applin, a Canadian company, of course. And in my role with them for the last 12 years, I was the director of learning and development. So leading all of the development and training and coaching, mentoring within the organization. I have been with ACSESS doing training like this for at least 6 years now, maybe longer. And I've really enjoyed connecting with ACSESS and collaborating and running training sessions like this, is getting individuals prepared on this particular module of recruitment and selection. And so again, I really hope that this will be interactive. I do appreciate that with a small group, that it will encourage all of us to engage a little bit more. So please do feel free to shut down anything else on your desktop and to allow yourselves to be here. And so first thing I'd love to do is just to get to know a little bit more about each of you. And normally I do this in chat, but because we have a small group, it just might be nice to hear everyone's voices. And I thought we can go around the table and learn a little bit more about, just so from a perspective, so I understand where you're coming from. How long you've been in the industry, what type of role, is there a particular function that you have or industry that you're responsible for? And so why don't we start with Stacy? Stacy, if you don't mind, just maybe sharing a little bit, if you're comfortable, on a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm kind of new, but kind of not to the industry. I've just recently taken over our family business, which is located in northeastern British Columbia. And so my mom could retire. And so I had helped her start the business 30 years ago. And I was in it for 10 years. And then I got out and did my own thing in design and interior design. So I'm just recently back into it, 3 months. And my mom's fully stepped aside. So I'm kind of just taking the reins again and getting my feet wet and things. But it's all very familiar, having owned my own businesses and things. The HR stuff is familiar. The recruiting part is a bit new for me because we have a lot of contracts in place for staffing. So it's kind of the recruiting part that we're looking at getting into. We do a few permanent placements a year, but they're more higher end managerial roles within the oil and gas industry here in Fort St. John. But so just looking at growing the business and kind of seeing where we can go with it. My mom had, kind of started to wind down a little bit, was thinking about selling, and then we decided to try something different and bring me back and try and grow back up to where we were at our highest peak. And yeah, so I'm just making my way and just doing a bunch of training and joining ACSESS again, I thought would give me the good, help with networking and things like that to kind of develop some new plans moving forward. And
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Stacy, for sharing
Yes.
that background there. I appreciate that.
Yes.
Welcome. Kevin. Oh, you're on mute.
You know, when I clicked on my camera, I clicked mute by accident. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. So, yeah, I've been in the industry about 30 years now. And like most, I guess you would call it, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. So I do a little bit of health and safety, a little bit of sales, a little bit of managing the internal staff. And I've been with Nexus now since 2007. I worked at a couple other agencies before, all mostly medium size. This would be, I guess, a small to medium size we are right now. Got a little smaller during COVID. We realized we didn't need all the offices, so
Right.
uh, here I am right now. And
Love that.
I was in the safety groups for years, and we kind of let that go during COVID. But you know, looking at doing things like these and making ourselves a little bit better.
Wonderful. And Kevin, out of curiosity, after 30 years in the business, what sort of inspired you to obtain your CPC?
Well, Mark, the owner, who's basically a close friend of mine, we thought, you know, it'd be good just to give ourselves a little bit more power out there, or just you know, doing things like this, talking to other companies and letting our clients know how serious we are about, you know, being. Yeah, I guess the licensing started it too. You know, it kind of made us rethink we should you know, get into a few things like these.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
Great. That's good to hear that.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Rudolph.
Yeah, so I've been in at least 15 years in HR, but 8 years in staffing, all with Manpower Services Canada.
Mhm.
I've been taking care of all my title is employment professional. So I handle all employee relations issues for staff
Mhm.
and temporary associates or independent contractors and all the fun stuff. So any claims, legals, whatever. So I enjoy that.
Nice. And sorry, and where are you located?
I'm in Montreal, in Quebec.
Montreal.
Yeah,
And
but we have.
Kevin, oh, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. We're in Toronto, and we have an office in Brantford, Ontario as well.
So Toronto, Montreal, and BC, and I'm based in Winnipeg. So we kind of got the whole country covered a little bit from one end to the next.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Good. Well, I'm really glad to have all of you here. And so just one of the things that we always like to reiterate to make sure that it's something that you're fully aware of is the ACSESS Code of Ethics. I always do like to get somebody to read this out. Stacy, you started first. Rudolph, you went last. So we'll kind of reverse this a little bit. Rudolph, why don't you read this out for me if you don't mind? And again, if anyone's not comfortable with sharing or coming on, let me know. But if you're comfortable to read this out for the group, that would be great.
Sure. As members of the Association of Canada's Search, Employment and Staffing Services, we commit to uphold this code of ethics and standards and to display it prominently in our place of business. We support the principles set forth below and acknowledge that compliance with these principles is in the best interest of ACSESS members, companies, their candidates, employees, client organizations, and the reputation of the search, employment, and staffing services profession in Canada.
Excellent. I will not make you repeat that back verbatim, but just sort of a good thing to keep in mind in terms of us being ambassadors for the industry and ambassadors for the brand as well. Kevin, if you don't mind just reading off some of these points. So what are some of the key points in the mission statement?
Identify, communicate, monitor industry standards and ethical business practices, positively influence and protect the regulatory and business environment that impacts our members and the people they serve, promote credibility, visibility of the industry to the business community, government, and general public, provide our members with strategic support services, programs, and tools to assist them in achieving their goals and objectives.
Yes. Oh, my slide just kind of disappeared here. Sorry about that. I don't know what's happened there.
I gotta change my screen too. There we go.
It just kind of went, disappeared on me there, but there we go. Okay. And so again, really just thinking about how ACSESS is really there to help for so many reasons and some of the things that are listed here, but really the purpose of this is to really think about how you want to show up for as an ambassador. And I really do talk a lot about that idea around, as recruiters, we want to be an ambassador for the industry. We want to uphold the highest level of expectation. We want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. We want to make sure that we're going above board when it comes to serving our clients and serving our candidates and the greater community. And so that's hopefully some of the things that you're learning throughout your CPC modules, and certainly something that we will explore and discuss today. But one of the things that I always like to start off with this particular session is the idea of the difference between recruitment and selection. Now, I know, Rudolph, you mentioned that you come from a traditional HR background, so you may be well versed in that difference between recruitment and selection. It's more of an HR oriented terminology. But to really think about the actual difference in the context of the training that we're doing today. So if I ask you what is the difference, if you were to define recruitment, if you were to define selection, what would be the difference between the two? And anyone can sort of come off mute and just sort of share what you feel the difference between what is recruitment and what is selection. And again, everything that we're talking about today is to help prepare you for your exam. So these could be the types of things that come up on there.
Well, I would say off the top of my mind, it's really two different processes. You know, you have the recruitment is really how to attract different candidates going forward, and the selection is really going the process for selecting the right candidate for the right job posting, job role, and so forth. So it's really two different processes and two different techniques to go through it.
Yeah, basically, one is the identification of the candidates and like how to find them and the recruitment piece of it. And then the selection is who is the one who has the most bona fide occupational job requirements, who is the right fit, who meets all of the KSAOs, of which we'll discuss a little bit later, right? So one thing is about recruiting, but the other one is selecting the right one. And so it's good to understand that difference. And so whereas recruitment really is that process of looking at choosing the right person for the right position and at the right time. Also, I'm looking at the screen. It refers to the process of attracting, selecting, appointing potential candidates. And so this is obviously one of the most important aspects of running, whether it's a new recruitment desk, whether it's an established one. But really looking at the right employees can really take your, obviously, this goes without saying, take your client's business to new heights. But also recognizing that if they are bringing in the wrong ones, how we can hurt their business by missing sales, turning customers off, so on and so forth. And then the selection piece of it is just that, it's one thing to recruit, but it's another thing to bring forward the right people to our clients. It's not enough just to find a resume and shoot it off to the client. That doesn't do anyone a service. It's like, how do we really pick the right one? How do we help enable our clients to pick the right one? How do we help them make the right decisions? And so in other words, this idea of selection can be explained as the process of, as we go through interviewing candidates, evaluating their qualities, so on and so forth. And so the employee selection is really that process of putting the right applicant on a job, not just any applicant for the sake of presenting a candidate. And you've all been in the industry for a while, so it might sound like it's the obvious, but it's really kind of helping you to, rethink a little bit, perhaps on your recruitment strategy, on helping your clients on that selection strategy. And so again, because for all of you who've had experience in the industry for a long time, it's also, a lot of this might be a refresher. It might be a gentle reminder. Some of it may be like, yep, totally obvious, that's stating the obvious. Some of it might be like, oh yeah, maybe it's just getting back to old, kind of what I call like old school recruiting skills, right? And trying to stay competitive and stay ahead in this market. And so the KSAOs is something that we'll talk about too, is how do we make sure that the candidates that we're bringing forward really meet the KSAOs of what the client is looking for? How do we work with the client to make sure that their expectations are on point? And so Stacey, can you read what a KSAO actually is?
Sure. So it's knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics are the attributes required to perform a job. Knowledge refers to the body of factual and procedural information that can be applied, such as knowledge of foreign languages or computer programming languages.
Thank you. And so out of curiosity, do your clients ever talk about these? Like, do they actually ever use that terminology, KSAO?
No.
Yeah, okay. And so, and how about for you, Kevin or Rudolph, is that sort of a terminology or things that come up, that kind of acronym?
No, not this acronym or whatnot. I mean, these things have come up in different languages, but not this actual acronym, no.
Right. So it's also sort of thinking a little bit about that too, like that might just be like a kind of a framework for us to make sure that we are on track when we're bringing the right candidates, that we're helping our clients stay on track when they're selecting and figuring out. So do they have the knowledge? Do they have the skills? Do they have the abilities? And we're going to break that down on what is the difference between do they have the knowledge? Do they have the skills? And then the abilities for them. It's going to shut my door here. And so the things that we'll be looking at overall, and so we'll go back to that KSAO. I'm just kind of introducing some of the things that we're going to explore. But overall, when we're thinking about the recruitment process and we think about the influencing factors of what we're going to be considering, it's all of the things that might influence that client. So again, what is the criteria? What are the KSAOs in the right individual? And how do we help source and screen to that? And how we help select that? How we help the client with a selection on that at times? But it's really looking at all of the influencing factors that are really in front of a client at any given time, right? A lot of it's money. Do they have the money factor in, meaning what's the pay that they're willing to provide? What's the other key influencing factor that we're dealing with when we're thinking about the relationship that we have that might influence or affect the hiring process? And I'd like to look at this before we jump into that recruiting process side of it. So it's just giving us a little bit more of that framework of all the things that come into this picture. What is the relationship that our clients have? Are they familiar? Do they trust us? What level of position are we looking to fill? That's another influencing factor that comes into the equation. What are the current market conditions? What's happening? Is there a supply and demand? What is the state of the client's internal business? That's an influencing factor on the impact of the hiring process. What about what their company policies are? Do they promote from within first, right? What does that look like? Are there any certain legislations that are coming up, pay equity, things around that? And what are the time constraints? How quickly are they looking to fill something? What are those time constraints? And so in your opinion, what factors have the greatest impact on recruitment for you? When you think about this, what factors have the greatest impact on recruitment?
From which point of view? The person being recruited or ours or our clients?
The factors that influence our clients' hiring process.
Probably time constraints, I would think.
In which way?
We needed them yesterday.
Right. It's like the hurry up and wait kind of idea.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so time constraints that might come up. What else can be a really significant influencing factor? And again, there's no right or wrong here. I'm actually like what you're seeing. What are you
sure.
actually experiencing?
I know for us, it's getting the jobs posted for, for the clients we work with, getting the jobs posted and then having to vet the employees and, find that candidate, right? It takes them a lot of time. And I mean, some of our businesses don't have high turnover, right? And so they have to almost relearn that process every time they need to hire someone for those positions.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So another factor there. So lots of things that we're just kind of keeping in mind. And so the reason for some of this is it helps us when we think about our own recruitment process, the speed of which we work, how we're finding the candidates, how we're working with the candidates, and how we can work with the clients at the same time, is just sort of recognizing that there's so many things that at times goes beyond our own control. What we can control is our processes when we find the candidates. So what we can do is process have control over our process of helping in that selection, make sure that we're doing a thorough, proper job, making sure that we're doing the background checks as we need to be doing, making sure that we're having and managing expectations with the clients. But these things are things that go beyond our own control. And so when we think about the objectives of recruitment in the hiring process, so that recruitment of looking for the right individual, and as recruiters or search consultants, whatever title you may go with, when you're well aware of the fact that there are multiple objectives and multiple challenges that come up during the recruitment process, we also need to keep in mind, we're well aware there's a lot of things happening, multiple objectives, but not all recruitment objectives are created equal. And so just like everything else, some are more important than others. And it would make sense that the ones that are the most important are the ones that lead directly to success, i.e. a successful placement. But when we think about our counterparts, the corporate recruiter, internal recruiters, talent acquisition teams, their objectives might be different. And so again, this might seem like to state the obvious and basic stuff, but I'd love to hear in your own words from your objective as someone in the search industry compared to the objective of your counterparts, right? Your colleagues or peers as talent acquisition specialists for our clients' companies. What would you say are some of the differences between your objectives versus the objectives of the internal teams? And again, anyone can chime in or type in chat.
Well, I think it's a timing thing for us. I know. I mean, a lot of our objectives are to you know, we have an open job order board that goes out every night, and we want to get that down to zero, which never happens. So our objectives are to fill as many roles as possible.
Right. Okay, so get it roles filled. What else?
I think for us, it's finding qualified candidates for those roles. We have a larger pool of candidates that, or applicants, I guess we would say, but we just have a larger or a smaller pool than we would in the bigger centers. A lot of people don't want to maybe commute up here. So that gets a bit tricky for us, is finding the skilled workers to fill those positions.
Yeah. Okay.
I would bring
So-
up money.
Oh, go ahead, Rudolph.
I was like, I would bring up the money part.
Hmm.
Because I'm sure for a TA or, as a corporation, your salary ranges are a bit wider. Where in the client, you can say, well, I want something at $15 an hour, which, it's almost impossible. Their wages, so it's a bit harder. You have more restrictions than you're supposed to, but it's
Right. Like you mean like internally, they actually can go a little bit wider if they're doing it
Right.
direct themselves versus, yeah, right. So we may not be getting the full truth of what's accessible from a money standpoint, sounds like.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, our goals are the same, right? At the end of the day, the goals are the same. Finding the best person. That success is represented by the best candidate for the position. So whether that's what we're bringing to the client or what the internal teams are looking for. So at the end of the day, right, we often feel like, oh, it's internal acquisition, like they're focusing on one thing, we're focusing on another. But at the end of the day, it comes down to who is the best candidate. So our job is to help them when we're thinking about the objectives within that hiring process, what our work is that we're doing, and if we're working with internal teams as well, is bringing that best candidate forward, that recognizing that our goal at the end of the day is, yes, we'll get our commissions and our bonuses and all that kind of great stuff, but it's really finding that we're representing the best candidate for the position, and that the clients too, internally, that's their goal, is they want to get the right people. But how do we do that? So there really is a couple of things that are really important, that our job, whether we're the only ones working on the search and there's no other recruiting companies that we're competing with, and there's no internal teams, or we're working against a bunch of recruiting companies and internal teams, doesn't matter. Our goal is two things. And again, that objective of the companies, our clients, is two things. Are we doing a balanced candidate evaluation? Are we actually looking and doing our job thoroughly and to the depth of what we should be doing, what we're getting paid for, right? Not just funneling resumes and shooting resumes out, but really doing a balanced candidate evaluation taking the time to do that process to its fullest, but then at the same time is making sure that the candidate has the willingness to join an organization. How badly do they want that? Do they really want to be a part of that company? Are they really serious about that role? And so these are the things that we're looking at. And so it's not, and we'll go through some of this, this thing to think about is where the candidate's willingness to join the organization. So for us, right, we're working, we're searching, we're digging, we're screening, we're doing all of these things to try to find the candidates. But we want to make sure, number one, do they have the capability to do the job? Number two, their willingness to do the job, right? That's a separate issue altogether. And then their ability to positively interact with management, peer support in it. So how do they interact with people if we're putting them in front of the clients? And so the candidate's willingness, and you may have already read this out loud, but this is where the company culture and employer branding enter the picture. So an organization and any recruiter working for that organization must brand the employer in positive ways. And this is not just during the recruiting and hiring process. This is an objective of recruitment that is non-negotiable. No matter how good the job itself is, if the candidate does not feel compelled to work for the organization, then it doesn't matter how good the job is. And so what do you think is important for us as recruiters to really be able to obtain and understand in order for us and our clients to be able to shed a light on them in the most positive way? Not to, like, to be honest, if there's something in the company that a candidate needs to be aware of that might be less than ideal, of course, we want to be transparent and disclose that, but to shed a positive light and to really be able to brand our clients and that our clients are branding themselves well. What are some of the things or the steps that are important in that process for us to be keeping in mind?
I think that, choosing to work with clients who are reputable, who have good reputations. I know, I only can speak of us being in a small town. We want all of our candidates to feel like they have, that we're putting them in safe places where we've qualified the candidates or the clients, and that they're not just going to some place where they have a bad history of issues with work or employees, and we want them to feel safe with us. We want them to accept our culture and like our culture and want to be a part of our team. And it's something that they're proud to tell their friends. And then the more they feel the company culture and the more they're kind of engaged with the company, I feel like it's it makes them want to work for us and do our contracts, know that they're good quality contracts.
Yeah, I love that. Right. Yeah. And what else? What else can be in addition to that? I think that's so important, right? Are we working with quality clients? It impacts our reputation as recruiters if we're not working with good quality clients. And not to say that every client that we're ever going to work with is like, there's always going to be clients where you're like, oh, there's a cup. I remember hearing that expression, right? There's a saucer for every, or a teacup for every saucer, a cup for every saucer. Like, but at the end of the day, we want to work with companies that are reputable, that are respectful, that treat people well, that have good policies and processes in place. But what else is an important part of that process and that step for us to really be thinking about?
I guess
Being
just
licensed. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry, just knowing the client, knowing, like you said, the culture and whatnot, but knowing the dynamics and what they're looking for. So, I mean, if you're screening an employee or a potential employee, you could pretty much know right away if they're going to fit that culture. So if you don't know the culture of the company, then there's really no point in even considering that person in the recruitment process. So
Yeah.
having a really good understanding of your customer, visiting your customer, not just knowing them from a phone call. We don't take any customers without, obviously, and this goes back to the health and safety even part of it, but visiting that client, doing a site inspection, and really knowing your customer as best you can.
Yeah, for sure. Great. And so what we will talk a little bit about too is just that kind of that whole, and also in addition to that, getting to know them, but it's also that job order and what is that, what does that look like, and how thoroughly are we understanding the client and their needs, and really making sure that we're managing that perspective of that. So in speaking about the clients, it's also really important for us to know, one, who they are, what they represent, and what they offer, so that we can do a good job selling our clients to our candidates and getting them interested. But at the same time, it's important for us in this whole process to understand that we're not the only ones, right? There's other things that the clients are often doing. So it's in addition to this idea is that we also want to make sure that we want to act quickly, especially when you talked about like time, right? What is it? What is their timeline? Is it realistic? Sometimes it's that hurry up and wait. Sometimes it's like the hurry up, we're ready. And so it's also that we're needing to act quickly. We want to have a good pool of candidates on the go and on the ready as much as we possibly can. And also recognizing that as recruiters, and I'm sure none of you do this, you've been going at this for a while, so you know that we can never assume that we're the only ones. And even if there aren't, even if legitimately we're like the only recruiting firm, but there's so many other things that we're up against. And so the more we know them, like Kevin said, we really get to know our clients, we build that trust, we build that relationship, hopefully the more that they'll be transparent and forthcoming with us. But we need to expect that they will fill their own candidates too, or they will find their own candidates. So we always need to act fast, but we always need to ask that question, right? Who do they have internally? Who are they potentially promoting from within? So in all of those influencing factors, one of them is, what is their company policy? Do they promote from within? Do they have an internal referral fee? Bring somebody you know, and if they stay for 3 months, you get your $1,000 bonus, right? What does that look like? And so companies have to move quickly, right? Companies meaning recruiters, if they hope to be successful to compete for the most sought after talent as well. So our clients need to act quickly, but we also need to act quickly. And so we really want to think about all of the different sources that we're looking at. And so who is our main competitor? Usually, I'm not talking about other firms, our main competitor is our own clients. Quite often is their own HR internal recruitment teams. So we want to be their ally. We want to work well with HR, of course, not see them as our foe. Promotions that can all of a sudden they're like, you know, we're good. We already found somebody. Oh, okay. How did that happen? Well, we decided to promote somebody. You're like, didn't ask that question. What about transfers from one branch or one city to the next? Maybe former employees who may be coming back. Actually, I had a conversation yesterday. I left my company in December, but I still keep in touch, and I had a chat yesterday with the president of our company, and she said, yeah, we have somebody that's coming back, who left our company, went somewhere else and coming back. So that position would have been filled, right, from a former employee that come back, or former employees that had a good relationship and they recommend other people, internal job postings, employee referrals, previous applicants. So it's really thinking about all of the things that we're up against, and it's not just other firms. We can handle being up against other firms. We can handle the way that we treat our candidates, how we go about in sourcing our candidates, but it's really also thinking about how well, like Kevin said, do we really know our clients? How much do they trust us that they're willing to share, so that we're not caught off guard? And so it's just really thinking a little bit about that. So we're going to hop into the 4 key areas that we're really focusing on today. Number 1, the job order intake, which is really important as a part of that overarching, how well do we know our clients? How well do we know the job? How well can we promote the job to our candidates? Are we finding the right candidates? Are we managing expectations? All of that good stuff goes right back to that job order. A poorly taken or a no job order, a poorly written job order will lead to a lot of challenges. The sourcing and finding candidates, and I'll invite us to have some dialogue around some of the best sources, because we're up against so much. When like some of you, like Kevin, you mentioned 30 years. I've been in the industry for 20 years. And well, all of you actually have a long history in the recruitment space. That what we were doing 20 years ago when I started is certainly not what we're doing today, right? At that time, I literally remember still having the yellow pages, like a big yellow pages going through, right? Who are the construction companies? Who are the manufacturing companies, in terms of companies? And then just really old school ways of finding candidates, which I do think old school still works really well. And in fact, it may be a little bit of that old school to get ahead. So what are some of the sources? And then the interviewing and candidates. So here we'll just talk a little bit about kind of that interviewing and candidate selection, and then just testing and references. And so there is also something to be said in our recruitment process about going too fast. So we want to be quick, but you also want to make sure that we don't compromise integrity. We don't want to compromise the entire process potentially by making mistakes and taking costly oversights. And so that's why this job order part of it is also so important. And so we'll really look at what kind of has to happen first. And obviously, it's the job order. What is it that the client needs? And so what is the purpose of a job order, right? Well, a well-qualified job order will provide us with greater opportunities. A poorly written job order will be harder. We'll struggle. We'll be behind the 8 ball, right? We'll be reinventing the wheel over and over again, potentially. We'll be missing the mark. And so when we think about that process of really interviewing the client, and I do hope that most recruiters are thoroughly interviewing candidates to really get to understand them so that we're bringing the right candidates forward. Again, it's not just putting a warm body in a seat, it's putting the right person to our client. The same way we want to thoroughly interview the clients. Sometimes clients will give us, well, we don't have time for that. But I used to throw it back at them and say, well, do you want me to spend a really good amount of time properly interviewing the candidate? Well, yes, of course. I need to spend a really good amount of time interviewing you to make sure I can get the right candidates, right? So it's a little bit of that pushback. But why do you think, what is your kind of take on the real purpose behind the job order for you? What is the real goal that you're trying to achieve when you're taking your client job order?
You're building their trust
Mm-hmm.
that you're going to find the right person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Trust is a big one, right? You want, by the end of your discussion with them, you want them to trust you that you're going to do the right job for them, right? To have that trust. And by doing that is by a good job order. I remember learning, I spent a lot of time doing a ton of training with all sorts of different recruiters over the year, or like trainers over the years. And one of them, I remember saying that your number one marketing tool, your best marketing tool, is your job order. And by the way, is everybody here doing 360 recruitment?
I would say probably around, for myself, around 5% for me. I don't do as much recruiting anymore, but when I do get involved, it would be that, yes.
So you're doing mostly business development?
Yeah, well, it would be, I mean, the majority of our work here is the hourly, industrial, and logistics.
Right.
So from that, we get a lot of spin-off recruitments, like we just placed a maintenance person yesterday. So I did the 360 on that.
Right. Got it.
So it would be, I would say, about 5%.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. All right. And then Stacy, you were shaking your head. What is your primary function?
So right now I'm doing the whole job. So I am the operations manager, but I'm doing the whole job and just really getting into that so that I can do the interviews, I can take the job orders. I just need to know the whole scope of it and then hire the people below me to kind of help me with that.
Got it. Yeah. So you're running that 360 right now. Okay.
Yeah.
Rudolph, how about yourself again?
Well, for sure, I'm not involved. I know I hear from the TA, so I think we do quite a bit on the internal for job orders with clients. I'm not sure, but I know we do job orders. The details of it, I'm not sure, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
just involved when there's a problem, so they call me.
Sounds good. Yeah, so it's really making sure that there's that process, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but there's a real value. And so if at any time anyone encounters that pushback, and do you ever get that pushback? And when I say, well, I guess I'll also ask this question, when you're with a client, and again, I know that it will vary depending on the kind of role that you're working on, how lengthy, what time is invested in getting a job order with the clients, generally speaking, for your roles?
I guess you're speaking more like a placement business though, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, for us, you know, the majority of ours is hourly employees. So,
Mhm.
I mean, that's why I just checked my phone. I'm just seeing what orders are coming in because they just email us orders. So the hourly is
Yeah.
much different. But if it's,
Mhm.
you know, if it's a placement type order, you know, usually my phone will ring
Mhm.
and, you know, we just start the conversation. Hey, we're looking for this role. Are you able to help fulfill it? And then we just usually get into a conversation, which is followed by them sending me you know, a proper job description.
Right. Yeah.
Back
So
to
it will
them.
depend, right? If it's sort
Yeah,
of hourly, like it's very quick, right? You're like, it's
it's
a much different
without
process.
notice. It could
Yeah.
be nine
Yeah.
o'clock tonight and it
Right.
comes in and we start working on it first thing in the morning or that night if
100%.
we have to. Yeah.
And you're not about to take a 1 hour job order for that. Yeah.
No, no, we're way beyond that one, but yeah, but
All right.
it's not unlikely either.
And Stacy, what about for yours? Like what do those job orders look like?
Um, usually it's a few emails back and forth, a phone conversation. And then they usually follow up with a job description so that we know what programs they're looking for and what skills the candidates are looking for with
Right.
regards to that. Some other job orders, we have a camp services division where we have camp cooks and things, and we manage them. So when they tell us that they're needing to open a new camp or whatever, we don't let them select the candidates. We do all the managing. So we just do all of that ourselves and then we just send them the people.
Okay.
And so they're not involved in that process. So we have two kind of different divisions with it.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. So yeah, so they're going to vary, right? And so it really is going to depend on the roles that you're working on. There's going to be a huge varying degree on what this might look like. And in the context of that, one of the things that's so important is that at least we get some information. Is that for us, the more that we know about the client. And so maybe Kevin, in your example, it's more here. Do we know the client? Do we know the company? Do we know what they like? Do they trust us? And it may not be so much specific on getting down to like the fine details on every single job, but it's, do we know what that client typically likes? Who
Mhm.
works well there? Who doesn't work well there? What is that overall experience going to be like? So maybe perhaps it sounds like it might be a little bit more about that than very, very detailed job specifics. Is that correct?
100%. I mean, I can even old school just blow through saying Indeed ad and I can eliminate so easily if they're going to
Mm-hmm.
fit into that client or not just because I know them so well.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's great. And that comes with that time, right? That comes with that trust, that comes with that success that we provide for them.
Mhm.
And so what do we need when we are doing a job order? And again, it's going to be to varying degrees. These are just some examples. And this may be, could be well versed also when it comes to temp or contract type roles. If it's a longer temp assignment, if it's a longer contract role, maybe not so much in that gig economy, but more in those longer ones, and for sure on more of a direct hire or permanent type roles, where we might be looking at what are some of the examples, not necessarily all of these things, but what are some of the examples of the things that we are looking for so that we do make sure that we're doing the right match, that we are finding the right candidate, we're matching them to the right job, but not just the right job, but to the right company. And so we can have a candidate that can be great for a certain job that can be in any company potentially as an example, but doesn't mean they're going to fit every company. They might fit the job description, they might fit the job requirements, they might fit the technical skills and strengths required, but they may not fit that company, right? So that's the difference here is, do we have the right candidate by their skills and attributes? Are they the right fit for the job itself, like the technical, they must have skills, but are they a right fit for that company? So there's a lot of things that we're looking at here to who will fit that company at the same time. So we're going to talk a little bit more about these things, but these are just some examples when it comes to working with our clients. What is the job itself? Do we understand that? Is that in our wheelhouse? Do we have those kind of candidates? Are we going to be going way out of our comfort zone just trying to find a candidate, or are we trying to stick within our wheelhouse? What is exactly what they're truly looking for? Do we understand that? What is the company like? What is the information? Do we understand that? Do we understand their working environments? Are we sending someone to a good working environment or not? I know you mentioned with some of the camps. So what is that like? So that we can match the right person. If they can, and I know that in Applin, two of our recruiters dealt a lot with camps way up north, and the conditions weren't always great. But they were great companies, and it was finding that right person who can do the job that was comfortable with that environment. The pay rewards, but the client's urgency, right? So really good to understand so that we're not spending hours spinning our wheels when they're like that hurry up and wait. We need somebody now, but 3 weeks from now, they're still not responding to our emails about the candidates we presented. And how committed are they? So just things generally speaking, that's always good to have in mind. Some other things, again, that's always good to be keeping in mind. When are we working with the right clients? Are we working with the right jobs? These types of questions aren't going to be a one size fits all. None of this is a one size fits all. It's all coming to varying degrees. But really looking at like why it's important for us to understand. So COVID protocols, actually, I should probably just delete that out of there now. That's kind of old school now, but
Yeah, please.
I could probably, I will have to remember to go in and delete that out. But what are the working policies, right? What is that policy of that company on relocation if they're moving going up to the camp? How long? What are those policies? What are those conditions? And I'm guessing you're talking about, Stacey, you're talking about like up in northern regions, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's what I thought, but just wanted to double check. What are their performance standards? What do they expect of these candidates and their capabilities? Do they have certain KPIs or metrics that are important for us to know? Again, that's not going to be fitting for all the jobs that you work on.
Yeah.
But the basics, right? Do we understand the hours, the length, the start dates? Do we understand what is important about the KSAOs? And that's where it's going to get really important. So what's the knowledge they need to have? What are the skills? They might have knowledge, but what are their skills? Like how strong are they at that? What are their abilities and attributes around that? And then other. Where we might learn or glean something from these clients on where to locate the right candidates if it's a little bit outside of our wheelhouse or if it's a newer area that we're tackling. What do they offer? What about stretching the order? Are you familiar with that overall terminology? How to stretch the order?
No.
No.
Okay. What do you think it could mean?
Spin off jobs from what you're placing?
That could be one way of looking at it, but not in the context of
Okay, all right.
I guess expanding the duties,
in which way do you mean?
expanding the information needed for the job to more details.
Okay, that's one aspect. What it really means is when we're having proper conversations with clients, and we're looking to like understand the order, try to understand what's important. Stretching the job order would be, for example, on a role, let's say they must have a university degree. We will not consider them without a degree. Okay. Now, if I bring you a candidate with the right knowledge, the right skills, the right attributes, but they have a college diploma, not a university degree, do you not want to hear about them? Well, sure I do. Okay, so now you've stretched the order. You've opened up the pool of candidates to not just university degree, but college diploma. If they say they must have 7 years of XYZ, if I bring you a really rock solid candidate, but they have 5 years at XYZ and they're really good, do you not want to hear about them? Well, sure, I want to hear about them. You've opened up the pool of candidates. So that's kind of that idea of stretching the job order. Also salary, let's say it's salary or hourly range, whatever that might be. But if I'm going to use the salary example, well, you mentioned that the salary is 60,000. If I bring you somebody super awesome, 65,000, turnkey, they can come in and do the job. Do you want to hear about them? Yeah, at 65,000, I would. what about if same candidate, but they're at 67,500? I still want to hear about them. If I bring you the same candidate, but they're at 70,000, do you want to hear about them? No, that's my flinch point. So that's kind of that same idea of stretching the order. So now you've opened up a pool of candidates from the ones that are now looking for 67,500, not just 60,000. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that placement I just did,
Mhm.
it was a 433A maintenance mechanic. It turned into they didn't need a license. So I know what you mean. Yeah.
Right? So it's important for us to be doing that with our clients so that we're not limiting ourselves on who we're going after. We're broadening that pool of candidates.
Mhm.
So those are just some of the things, right? The other things that are important to be keeping in mind. And so last thing too is what happens though if we can't get all that information? What happens if the client doesn't give us the time of the day? They're a good company, but maybe they're not as committed to the process. Maybe they're like, they don't want to give us any information. They're just like, well, you're the expert. You go find the candidate, right? How many times did I hear that in my life? Well, you're the expert, right? Here's the job description. Now go find them, right? In some jobs that might work. That might be okay, depending on the job. But in some jobs that may not work. And so if you don't have all the information that you need, how do you obtain the information so that you can find the right candidate, promote the job to the right candidate, prepare the candidate for the job, make sure that there's no surprises so the candidate doesn't call you after day one on the job going, what on earth did you get me into? Right? How many of those have I received? Like, what did you get me into here? Well, I guess I don't have enough information. So what other sources can we potentially think about to try to get information when the client is limiting access to giving us information?
Previous job orders.
Okay. Yep.
Maybe you could check their own website if they have internal positions.
Okay. So their own website, right? What do their other positions look like? Yeah.
I'll tell you what I normally do. It's probably the wrong way to do it, but I'll send them a feeler candidate and ask them for feedback on what they need and what they don't need from what I've sent them.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, you can, yeah. I mean, for the candidate himself, hopefully we want to manage their expectation if they're going to get the job or not, but they might, right? You might send them that filler, like, perfect, let's hire them.
Yeah, but if I've got someone, it could be a customer service person that I've been working on and other things, and they know they didn't get that job, but I'm holding on to their resume. I might share that resume with them and find out if they might be a fit there and what they have or what they don't have, just to draw more information out of the client.
Yeah, and then the way that and maybe you already do that. What would be sort of a I would say more of a proper way of potentially doing that would be making sure that that candidate is okay with you presenting their resume to
Oh
that
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
no, for sure. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
No,
Got it.
I'll give them a heads up for sure. I've got this other, absolutely, no, for
Yeah.
sure.
Perfect. Right. So you can do
Yeah,
a
I
few.
want to make sure they're available too, in case the client doesn't say, yeah, I'll see them, and then they're
Yeah,
not
they're
available.
already like, I already sent my resume there. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
So other things, so past job orders, looking on what's on the website, right? Just some basic stuff. But again, it's like, sometimes it really is like, okay, like I need to present this opportunity to this candidate, but I know nothing about the job. I know very little. Like the job description is enough, maybe, but everyone else is looking at that same job description. So maybe it is what's in your CRM, if you have a CRM system, right? What is in your CRM already about that company? What are past placements? What did that look like? What was that information? Good old Google, right? Like Google the company, find out some information. Are they in the news? Has there been any updates about the company? Anything bad about the company? Sometimes it's going to Glassdoor. Maybe it's other candidates who know stuff about that company, just intel that you learn over the years, right? By interviewing the same or working with the same candidates. They're like, oh yeah, I worked at that company. I would never go there, this, that, and the other. Sometimes you take it with a grain of salt. And again, you're not going to do a thorough dig on all of this for every job because that could be a full-time job in of itself. But depending on the job, when the time is required to invest in this kind of thing, invest in it. If not, and you're working very quickly on getting candidates in and out, depending on the job, then you're going to manage that, obviously. But you're looking at things like, looking at LinkedIn, maybe what their background is. Sometimes it is a little bit of assumptions. Maybe it is online reviews. Maybe it is previous and current employees that you've connected with there, you've already placed there. Again, the role, Google. Maybe there's different industry insights or other job boards. Maybe there's, news or that public kind of, if it's public or private, what information they have. So just trying to do whatever you can so that because you work so hard, we work so hard to find candidates for these jobs and to do a thorough job, but to also get them in front of our clients before another competitor does, right? We also want to work quickly, but you also want to get the right information so that there's no surprises. So some of the other things that I've often thought about when I'm working with a client, right? It's important that we make sure that we have as much, I know I put in there all the information, but we want to have as much information as we possibly can get. Right? We don't live in a perfect world where we get everything we want from our clients, but there's as much as I'm trying to understand the basics, like at the core basics. What are the titles I'm looking for? Like you said, Kevin, you started off with one, but then it went to something different in the sense of what they needed. So what are the titles that I want that's relevant to that client? What are the alternate titles I'm looking for? What's one rung below that title? So I can look for somebody that potentially can move into that. What are the core industries? Are there sub-industries? Are there all different companies? What are the direct competitors, indirect competitors, compensation, like the basics to help me find these candidates? And so as long as I have, like, this to me would be the very basic, right? On certain jobs. Sometimes you're placing the same kind of candidate with the same company over and over and over and over again. You already know it's just like a well-oiled machine on what you're looking for. Are there other things that you look for? Are there other things that you're considering when you're getting the information from your clients that will help you not only find the right candidate, but sell the opportunity to the candidate? What are some other steps that you may do to make sure that you're creating a successful match? Anything else that you're doing or you may be doing differently? Does anyone use it? Oh, go ahead, Rudolph.
I'm just thinking, like, so I'm just looking at the titles and all that, and one thing that's coming to mind is like the duration of the contract or placement, or because they're looking for someone to fill a role for 1 month, 6 months, a year, because the year is easy, 1 month is gonna be harder. It's gonna be
duration. If it's contract or temp, what is that duration? Right? Maybe somebody a year is too long of a contract. Maybe it's like, I'm not doing it unless it's a year. Yeah. What about job order forms? Do you have any specific forms that you use to make sure that every time you're working with the client, you're getting the right questions?
Yeah.
You're making sure that you're asking the most important things. And then the rest that you're able to squeeze out of that conversation is like the gravy. But the core basics, like this to me would be the most basic that I would work, but I also ran a perm desk, right? So I wasn't working. So for me, this was just an example. But also all the training I did with all of our temp and contract recruiters said this was sort of their go-to. Was there anything, do you have certain forms that you might utilize?
Yeah, we have a job description or a job order sheet with lots of questions for admin roles. We have the camp roles, as well as we have anything else, whether it's oil field operators or other options. And then we have a kind of a drop down of different job descriptions and requirements and questions for each of those different industries and fields.
That's great. That's beautiful. So that you've got so for different ones, it's different thing. And I used to have that too with all my job, every different job, because I had different industries I was dealing with. The core foundation would be the same, but then there would be some really getting specific to that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's take a step now into step 2, which is really the core of this title of this course, which is recruitment and selection. So the sourcing and the finding of candidates. And we're really looking at how can we find the right candidates, get them in our virtual door unless you're meeting candidates face to face now, which some are, some aren't still. Just are any of you meeting candidates face to face, or is it virtual?
It's a mix.
Oh, go ahead.
I said it's a mix.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we do a mix as well.
Mix. Okay, good. And I think that meeting candidates face to face is probably one of the best ways to build that relationship with them, for sure. So that's good. But also remembering to get them in that virtual door or that physical door and out to clients as fast as you can, but while maintaining the accuracy on finding the right person. You don't want to waste time for you on meeting the wrong people. You also don't want to waste the client's time by sending them the wrong people. So it's really thinking about at the end of each day, at the end of the day, you're asking yourself, what did I do today to move the needle forward? At the end of the day today, what did I do to move my desk forward in terms of bringing in the right candidates, making sure that they're getting out to the clients as well. And so we really want to be thinking around what is the fastest way to do that, to find the right people. And so when we're looking at the different sources of candidates, right, the idea is also to build and maintain a candidate database that evolves and becomes self-sustaining. And some would actually say it's the sum of the recruiter's worth. Is if we don't have the candidates, we can have all the jobs, right? We can have 30 jobs to work on, or 2 jobs or 3 jobs, depending on what kind of desk you run. But if we don't have the candidates, we don't have the jobs, we don't have the placements. So the maintaining this ongoing pool of candidates and really building a strong, positive, and trusting relationship with them is really going to result in a referral base of other marketable candidates, and is going to have them trusting you and coming back and knowing that you're representing good quality companies, that they will want to come back and work with you because they like how you work, they trust you, they like the companies that you represent. And so that's hopefully the ideal in terms of working with candidates. But what is some of the way that when you're thinking around the candidates, we want to be thinking a little bit around, well, what is our selection criteria? What are some of the things that we are thinking about in maintaining a strong database of candidates that become self-sustaining? So it's a sustainable model of recruitment, right? We have really good candidates, you're getting them in front of one client. Maybe I'm guessing, Kevin, you had commented that because you have like a lot of short-term positions, you're placing the same candidate probably over and over and over again.
Yeah, and when I say short term, I mean temporary, hourly. We don't, most of our temporary employees, it's long term, and they go temp to perm. We don't touch any of the short term. I need a landscaper for a day. Just we don't go anywhere near it. So a lot of our companies, they're Fortune 500 companies or medium to large companies, where they have, and this goes back to my safety group days where, we want to make sure that they're looked after. So we don't worry about that too much. One term that drives me crazy from my clients, and I try to steer them away from it, is we don't have people swimming in a pool waiting to get called for work. I hate the term pool of people. It makes it sound so cattle callish and whatnot. But so I've eliminated pool of people from my vocabulary years ago.
Yeah.
And it just gives a false sense, like as we were talking, and I wanted to get you an exact figure. But yeah, we have a really good tailor-made CRM system we use. So if someone asks me what my pool of people are, and if they really push me on it, I tell them we have 38,766 people in our pool.
Right.
But do we?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. There's a commercial they play here in Toronto all the time. It's a real estate agent, and he's bragging about how many he has in his pool of people to buy houses, and it's like 12,000 people. Well, okay, you don't have 12,000 people to sell
He
this
doesn't need to do
person's
an ad
house.
if you have 12,000 people.
Exactly.
Have to spend the
So,
money on that. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so it kind of drives me crazy, but. And then we just go back to that whole relationship with our client. We kind of know when their peaks and valleys are. We know when there's going to be a bump. We reach out to them to have a coffee, to go meet with, to find out, hey, and here's another word I hate. How are the tariffs going? And it's more to find out, are you still going to be needing us at the end of May?
Mhm.
So all of those things, that's how we build our pool and get ready for it. And then there's
Yeah.
always the undetermined calls that you're going to get. And then
Mhm.
the undetermined, hey, can you help me with this placement? And that's why I said it's about 5% of our business. It's not a large part. But when
Got
we
it.
do it, we all get involved, and usually, I'll get the
Mhm.
final say and present the candidates to our customers. But
Yeah, yeah. No,
um,
thank you for sharing that. And yeah, and I sometimes use the phrase talent pool as well when thinking back. Actually, what a lot of our recruiters or business development people would be saying too is more of that, like rather than pool, they would talk about like a talent matrix, but it's kind of
right.
thinking about the different individuals that would be a good fit for those different roles. And I love
Mhm.
that comment, like this is our talent pool, right?
Yeah, and then we deal with that with the hourlies all the time. We go back to a couple slides ago when you were talking about if, someone's not a fit just because they're not a fit at XYZ company,
Hmm.
and they say, oh, we don't like this employee. I mean, we'll still try them somewhere else as long as obviously there's no damage or theft or
Hmm. Hmm.
violence in the workplace. We'll try them somewhere else and they've been a great fit somewhere else. So it's really kind of knowing and
Yeah.
getting feedback from customers as well. Okay, why weren't they a fit? Well, we'll try them here then. So
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a
it's,
great, thank you. Thank you for sharing your
yeah.
thoughts on that too. And so one of the things that's obviously important for us is when we are working with clients and we're helping them to bring the right people forward, is that selection criteria. And so some of the things that are highlighted in yellow, by the way, are things to really be thinking about. Also, when it comes to preparing for your exam, um,
Mhm.
is selection criteria, right? What is selection criteria? And this idea for selection criteria is developed to guide recruitment decisions. So during the recruitment process, applicants are assessed. Again, you've all been in the industry for a while, and I love that. I know in some of the groups I've trained, it's been a lot of like really, really new people to this industry. So for you, a lot of the stuff will seem counterintuitive that you already know that kind of per se. But selection criteria is really a guide for recruitment decisions, and something that your HR departments with the companies that you're working with may often utilize this kind of terminology and phraseology as selection criteria. And how do they select, and what is the criteria that it's measured against? They may have different kinds of their own talent matrices that they're looking at in terms of how do they compare on a scale. So during that process, applicants are assessed to the extent that they meet that selection criteria. So the preferred candidate is obviously selected according to their overall suitability and the best fit with the criteria relative to other candidates. So in some organizations, right, they may have that ABC ranking. They meet with your candidates depending on the role. Sometimes we're placing the candidate, they show up and next day, and there's not a formalized interview process per se. Some of the roles that you're working on, there will be more of that formalized interview process. So it's kind of that ranking system and looking at what is that selection criteria for them to be considered an actual candidate, for them to be one that they would potentially move forward with. And so at times, you and or your clients together may use this assessment grid matrix. I know in many of the roles that I worked on over the years, I was using a matrix that was provided by the client in that recruitment selection to make sure that they were systematically comparing each candidate. So it's candidate A is compared fairly to candidate B, compared fairly to candidate C. Has anyone ever worked with a grid in your recruitment process, or have been provided one, or have had to create a grid for your clients to present candidates to them based on a grid?
No, not myself.
Okay.
We have one client that we deal with, and when we do a placement, they use hourly staff as well.
Mm-hmm.
They have one called a preview test.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've heard of that one,
No.
but it's basically aptitude slash personality slash could have a little bit of um, psychology background to it. I've never actually seen the test,
Mm-hmm.
but if anyone's being considered even for the first interview with them, they will have them do this preview test first.
Yeah, I've had plenty of clients that kind of had
Yeah.
something called that, but very, very similar to that. Like first things first, that had to happen.
Yeah, so when
Um,
I'm interviewing them, you have to let them know that if I put you through, they're gonna have you do this before they even meet with you. So
mhm.
most people take it okay. Other people are a little uncomfortable with it. So
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, no, that's a good example of something that has to kind of happen at the beginning. But before we could actually start sourcing candidates, before we could actually start promoting jobs to the candidates, we also really want to know what at the end of the day, what is the determining the selection criteria for the client? We may not utilize that terminology with them per se, but at the end of the day, what are they actually really looking for? They could send us the job description, but what's underlying that? What's really important for them at the end of the day? And that will help to guide our recruitment decisions. It will help us to make sure that during the recruitment process, applicants are assessed on the extent to which they meet that. And so the preferred candidate is selected according to the overall suitability of these things. So this is just an example, obviously, right? Do they have a CPA? They have to have this, they have to have that. So at bare minimum, what is the ranking for these things? Well, this candidate was a 2, maybe candidate B was more of a 3. And so it's making sure that we really understand at the end of the day, what's going to make that client make that decision. And so we can't necessarily start spending, we can, but we don't want to waste a bunch of our time and our energy and our resources on looking for the wrong people, talking to the wrong people. How do we get right to the point and cut to the chase on who are we reaching out to? What is that true criteria? And that's where that job description or that job order comes in so importantly for that. So that before we start sourcing, we know what we're measuring against. So that's just an example. Not every company will do that, but I just wanted to share that with you because that was just some of the things that some companies may or may not use internally. And so what are some of the sourcing mistakes that recruiters make? So we're thinking about going out there and finding candidates. And so number one, making assumptions about candidates you've never met. So what's wrong with that one?
Hard to get insight into people and kind of their past experiences and personalities by not meeting them, by just reading a piece of paper. Sometimes they don't put as many details on it as they need to. As well, it's just always better to meet them in person and to have a direct interview with them.
Yeah,
Uh,
great.
I'll go the other way around because a lot of people
Hmm.
do fantastic jobs on resumes, and then when you meet them, it's like, oh my God, it's horrible.
And it's both. Well, that's exactly why we need to meet the candidates for sure. So you might see both, but we make assumptions about candidates we've never met. So we're sourcing, we're looking at their LinkedIn profile, we're looking at their resume. Even sometimes if you speak to somebody about getting a referral and something comes up and they're like, you know, that one person's experience with somebody may be different. That's even part of it when we do reference checks, right? One person's experience may be different than reality. So we make assumptions about candidates we've never met. And so when you approach a candidate with this attitude, you're assuming something about somebody you don't really know anything about. And the truth is you have no idea what they're going to like or not like. We might look at their resume and go, oh, they're not going to like that job. Or, right, so it's really thinking around making sure that we don't discount people. Discounting active job seekers. This is kind of an oldie but a goodie because that used to be the case, right? Long time ago. And it's a little bit now too. I hear more, some clients are discounting active job seekers. And why? Why do they sometimes, unless you're in a temp, you're running temp, where there's a lot of active job seekers potentially. But if you're discounting active job seekers, what's wrong with that?
A lot of times I think people assume that they're continually changing jobs or right, or that they just keep bouncing from position to position, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, so they make assumptions about things. So there was that point in time where it's like, I only want passive job seekers. They must be the best ones. The ones who aren't really looking. They must be the ones that are gainfully employed, not the ones who are quote unquote desperately looking for employment. Right? There was, you know, definitely some of that. And that still happens a little bit. So we really want to make sure that we don't discount them. Just because we get a resume of somebody who's unemployed doesn't mean that they're not going to be a great fit for something. It's understanding why, or why they've made changed jobs a lot. What is going on there? And we're not going to go through all of these, but these are just often mistakes too. Writing general job ads that don't weed out weak matches. It takes a millisecond to apply to a job today. I know my daughter who's 18 is like applying for like everything, and it takes a second, right? Hit submit. And for this reason, it's often easy for a recruiter to amass thousands of resumes, or that might be an exaggeration, but when placing an ad online. And so what's wrong? Unless you've met some kind of, bar for a candidate to jump over, it's too time consuming to go through too many resumes. So putting a few things into an ad to maybe weed out some of those people who are just sending their resume off without consideration doesn't always work, because they're still just going to send a resume to everything. Sometimes it's turning that blind eye to a candidate who doesn't fit to a T. And so does anyone ever do that, right? They're turning a blind eye. I hear that all the time in groups. Oh yeah, well, I'm always looking for the 10 out of 10. Of course, I'm not going to talk to somebody who's a 7 out of 10 and they're not a 10 out of 10. But a lot of recruiters are set on candidates having everything and turning a blind eye to those who maybe fall a little bit outside the lines. And so if we're being too rigid, then we might miss out on people who have great attitudes. And that's where that stretching that job order comes in. And so client, if they don't have 10 years of experience, but they have 7 years of the experience, do you want to hear about them? And so thinking about speaking to, so basically what it is, it's not really, this whole thing is about don't rule too many people out, right? Have the conversation, have the connection, and sometimes say, well, I don't have time to do all of that. Well, we need to, right? Take the time. 30 minutes a day, if you're the one who's doing sourcing and recruiting and interviewing, build it in. And so when we think about some of the factors, there's a lot of mistakes that we make assumptions, and we're not putting in the time in some of the candidates that we may quickly overlook. Does anybody resonate with some of these commonly known quote unquote mistakes that recruiters might make? Do any of these land?
I know for us, it's our writing in our job descriptions.
Mhm.
We can do better on that, putting in more criteria to get the qualifications and kind of set that bar a bit higher for people that have the experience with those jobs, rather than just getting a bunch of resumes with people that don't have any of the qualifications. So I know we're working on our social media and how we're posting our jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big one. For us, is that we just need to do a better job of narrowing in on the exact position, and like you said, maybe stretching it a little bit for some people, but
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so that happens to be one. Anyone else, or some of these, the turning a blind eye or discounting?
I'm gonna go the opposite when you said looking for a 10 out of 10 on a resume.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for more the 7, 8. And the reason being is a lot of people are looking at our job description and they're AIing it or whatever they're doing, and it's hitting too many of the points too perfectly.
Yeah.
So you can pretty much see it right away. And if you
Yeah.
look at the companies they work for, if you do a quick cross-reference, okay, how can they be operating that machine if they were working at this company? Because they
Mm-hmm.
clearly wouldn't have, we'll use a metal stamping machine if they're working at a print shop. So
Yeah. Right.
I'm kind of looking at more the 7s and 8s if they're hitting that many of my points.
Oh yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
We when I say that, we should
Yeah.
blind eye. Like, though we need, if
Yeah,
there's
no,
7
it's
or
just
8,
funny because I
go
was
for it.
looking at it almost the other way too. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. Right. We don't want to rule people out, right? We're in a market where there's a lot of people, there's opportunities, there's competition. And we want to, it's about having the right candidates. So when we think about factors, and we're just going to quickly go through this, we're going to go through a couple of things, then we're going to take a 5-minute break. But factors to consider, right? So number one, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, and you'll talk about this more in some of your other sessions if you haven't already, with like Steve Jones, I think, is running those ones, but legal requirements. So what are the bona fide occupational requirements, right? Making sure that before we source, what are those legal requirements? Is it a bona fide occupational requirement that they be able to lift so much or be able to do certain things? What is the human rights code, right? Are we operating ethically within that? Again, other things that we're thinking about, because time is money and time is precious and time is a resource. What is the client's urgency? What is their actual urgency to fill the position? Right? What, again, is this going to be another hurry up and wait? Or am I investing my time and energy where I should be right now? What is the client's in-house recruitment expertise again? What does that look like? What am I up against? Do I have a good relationship with our talent acquisition? Are we transparent? But what is their own expertise in terms of knowing kind of what that looks like? Employment Standards Act, thinking about employment equity and proportional representation, and making sure that we're upholding that too. If clients ask us to do things that go beyond that, right? That's not a really kind of company we want to partner necessarily with. Do we understand the role complexity? And then really, do we understand that availability of the pool candidate? So these are just some of the things that we're keeping in mind before we start now putting all of our efforts into the sourcing. Number one, do we understand the job? Do we understand the company? Do we understand what they're looking for? Do we have enough of a job order or information that we need? Do we know how to sell it to the candidates? So we're going to go and we're going to start the whole process. And do we have the information that we need? So why don't we actually take a short break right now? It's currently 1:23 my time. So why don't we come back in 7 minutes? And for the next half of the session, we'll just kind of talk a little bit more about sourcing avenues. We'll talk a little bit more about the interview process and making sure that we're measuring things fairly and accurately and taking a balanced approach to that. And then we will talk a little bit about testing and references. So why don't we come back in 7 minutes, grab some water, stretch your legs, and I will see you back here in a few minutes.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome back. Okay.
Hello.
Hello, hello. So I thought we would just talk about different recruiting sources. And so again, I appreciate you all have some strong experience with this, with candidates and working. But curious to know how, this is recruiting sources for headhunting, but just generally speaking, some sources that you find that really work well in terms of finding candidates. So what are some of the most commonly known sources that you would typically go to? So obviously LinkedIn. Again, when I started, LinkedIn wasn't even a thing.
Hmm.
So it was like amazing. All of a sudden, we're like, this is amazing. And then it's like, oh, wait, everyone is just using LinkedIn. Twitter, right? There are things you could technically do in Twitter or X. A lot of people don't, depending on the kind of roles, but people have used that. Facebook and Instagram, some people do use that. There's unique sources and ways of doing that. Google X-ray searches, Boolean strings, good old staff directories of the companies where they might even still exist, right? Meet the team. Trade show member directories, that's kind of old school for the associations that still have those on their websites. Maybe Zoom info. What are some of the sources that you find the most useful in terms of sourcing candidates for your jobs?
We do most of ours, Instagram, Facebook. We don't really do much for Indeed. Indeed, we just get, we found it was costing us a fortune because we get charged for people that apply. And we were just getting a lot of resumes for people that don't have the skills. So we don't do anything that, but we have some local job boards that we post our job postings to. I mean, we're a much smaller circle of places where we can look for candidates, but social media is kind of our biggest thing. Local job boards in the area.
Okay, so local job boards and so again, looking for candidates on there, but sometimes you can't even, post some of those jobs and some of those boards too, like depending on the role. I know some people have had some good success posting like free ads on Kijiji as an
Yeah.
example, if they were looking for certain things, that seemed to be a popular one.
Oh, okay.
Especially for sort of more of those short-term contract type individuals or temporary type roles where they're looking for something. Posting your ads on LinkedIn. What other avenues that might be a really good source in addition to your own CRM system, of course? What would be some other good sources that you find that seem to work well? And again, this is just to show that all the sources. And I remember when I was coaching a lot of people in the team or mentoring, they're like, I can't find any candidates. They just don't exist. I've scoured through LinkedIn and they're just not there. Okay. And
Well, we do have good success with Indeed. I understand what you mean. Is it Stacy that said that? You're not getting what you need, and yeah, it's they call it a per click. So we just have a monthly budget for it, and yeah, sometimes by the end of the month it runs out. But if we put a couple of say general labor ads or forklift ads or whatever out, we'll especially at the beginning of the month we'll get quite a bit, and then we also put our placement ads on there. But for a lot of our customers, they also they get a lot of walk-ins themselves. So they have a bunch of our um, business cards and they have our QR code at their office. So when they say, they'll just tell the people that knock on their door, you can scan our agency's QR code and there's their information. You can contact them. So we use our own clients as referrals to get business as well.
Love that.
Mhm.
Rudolph, were you about to say something too?
No, I agree. Like I said, I'm not much in the whole area, but like what Kevin was saying, that I know some of our clients we have like on sites and they put a banner and say he click here and no, it works out, which is good. It's that.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
And
No, there's and so again, it's really just to show like that there's so much more that goes beyond just like the typical sources that we might think, right? Receiving resumes or just trying LinkedIn or Indeed, that it goes so beyond that. And so it's just really thinking about those sources. Now, in terms of the head hunting itself, some are actively headhunting, some are actively sourcing candidates that are new candidates and doing the reach out. Some are just getting more resumes. So some organizations have different kind of what is their setup. Does your company do direct outreach in terms of trying to find candidates directly, or is it a lot more of the candidates just coming in, placing jobs on Indeed or placing jobs on your own company's internal website? Or is there external outreach? Is there contacting people directly and trying to just reach them out of the blue?
For Nexus, it's just we've got our fishing line in the water. We're not really, you know, the traditional headhunter type.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So a little bit different sources here.
Mhm.
So the other thing that that I want to look at here too is again that sort of that idea, that good old passive candidate sourcing. So that may not be as relevant in your case, Kevin, but that idea of that passive candidate sourcing and picking up the good old phone. A lot of people don't do that enough anymore. It's hard to get candidates' phone numbers. How do we reach them? Where do we reach them? But if we were in a position to be able to reach people, and people are always, when I'm training them, well, how do I just pick up the phone and call them? Well, sometimes it's reaching out to the organizations that they're at, right? Calling somebody, getting through the front reception, getting through the gatekeeper to the best of your ability, and simply saying, you know, are you able to put me through to blank? The individual who, right, maybe you find a name on LinkedIn, but if we just send them a message within LinkedIn, they may never see that message, right? And so a lot of people are, I've done everything. I've sent messages on LinkedIn. I've sent like dozens and dozens of messages, and it's just not working. So I guess people aren't interested. Well, the reality is that so many people aren't recruiters who live on LinkedIn quite a bit, right? Many of us live on those places because that's where we do a lot of our work. But a lot of candidates, that's not where they exist. They don't check their LinkedIns anymore. They check it so infrequently. Half of the time, those people don't even know their passwords to get in anymore. And so we make these assumptions that, well, they must not be interested. But what we need as recruiters, our job is to get a name. That's what we need. We need names. We're hunting and we're gathering and we're and then, you know, farming those relationships, but we're gathering, we're name gathering. So once we have a name, it's how do we reach them? And some people are still nervous about that idea of picking up a phone. Let's say somebody works at Coca-Cola, and you know that John Smith works at Coca-Cola in Burlington, Ontario. Well, what's stopping you from calling Coca-Cola and saying, can I please be put through to John Smith in the Burlington office? Do you guys, I mean, and people, you often get like a bit of an allergic reaction when they even think about that idea. But is that something that you would see as valuable, or that's even relevant to the work that you currently do today? What are your thoughts on that idea of the good old school technology, picking up the phone?
But I think for us, well, because we have our IT division, I think that will work quite a bit. Like you reach out to someone who's working at IBM, Microsoft, whatever, and say, hey, you know. So I think they do quite a bit of that because, like I said, via LinkedIn or other sources might not always work. So I know that division they do call,
Mm-hmm.
and it does work.
It does, right? It's old school. It's going old school. It's picking up the phone and going old school so that we're not waiting to see if a candidate's potentially going to respond back to us when we can. And it doesn't always work. But often, again, whenever candidates or the recruiters would say, I can't reach anybody. No one's responding to my emails. No one's responding to my LinkedIn messages. Have you picked up a phone? You know where they work. Have you tried that old school way, getting put through to their extension? Getting put through to their cell number, depending on who it is, depending if that company's gatekeeper lets you through. So it's just thinking a little bit too and again, it may not be as relevant for each of you, but just something that that's a point in conversation. So let's switch gears to the screening process of things. So good recruiters qualify the candidates they meet in advance of presenting jobs to them. Hopefully, most recruiters are actually interviewing and communicating with candidates directly. You said that you meet some candidates virtually and in person, which is great. And so making sure that the candidate has the right skills, they have the right capabilities required, and the right motivations for the job as well. So what is their motivation? And so that we're making sure that we're not just placing people, but we're placing people that that are going to be invested in the process, but that are also going to be interested. And so some of the key things that we're really thinking about during the screening phase is 3 key objectives. Number 1, is the candidate a quote unquote star, right? Are they a good candidate? Are they just a quote unquote a warm body in a seat, for a lack of better expression, but often hear that in our industry? Are they just a bum in a seat? Are they a star? Do they have good quality? Are they somebody that we can place with our clients? We're often thinking about during that screening process, am I exerting my time and energy interviewing this person for the right reason? And what opportunities do I have that might be a right fit? So when we're in that screening phase, we're thinking about these objectives. Are they a good candidate for me? Am I spending my time interviewing the right people? And do we have opportunities? And so when we're thinking about that process, we want to think about, well, what are we trying to uncover? And so in this process, what are we trying to uncover? What is important? And so I understand that everyone may have a different process. Some individuals may go straight to one interview with a candidate and then submit their resume to the client. Some will have a 2-step process. First, it's a phone screen. Maybe it's a 10 to 15-minute phone screen, just to even get the simple basics before deciding to spend more time in a more formalized interview. And again, sometimes that's 2 in 1, where it's one phone call, you screen them, you make a decision, you present the role to them, you present them to the client. What is your process? And again, it doesn't mean there's right or wrong. It's really dependent on the type of desk you operate and the type of roles you fill. But do any of you have that 2-step process where it's first a quick screen, so that are they the right candidate? Do I have a job for them? Can I place them? And then a more deeper interview, or is it the 2 in 1?
We do,
I do.
sorry,
ahead.
we do
Go
the
ahead, yeah.
2.
You do too?
Yeah, and so once we get the resumes, we go through and see if they match any of the jobs we have. But we also, if we get a resume and it's a good candidate, we just bring them in right away for an interview. And then do all the reference checks and things after. So I don't know if that's the same thing that you were talking about, but
Yeah. Step 1, step 2, right? So sometimes it's a 1-step process, sometimes it's a 3-step process, but generally speaking, it's either a 1-step process, 1 phone call, 1 conversation, go to the client, or it's that 2-step. And what were you, Kevin, you were gonna say, Kevin or Rudolph, one of you was gonna say?
Yeah, same. It starts with a phone call. I call them up, usually on the ad, and see if it's a fit for them quickly, see if it's a fit for us, and then usually book them either for a physical or a Teams meeting. We're finding more people are inclined to do the Teams meeting lately, so I don't mind doing either. But it's got to be a good Teams meeting. They have to be fully engaged and
Yeah.
cooperating with the interview process. If it's the hourly, it's much different. Our hourly recruiters will very quickly remind them what they were, applying to. And if they're interested, all of the hourly people that we hire are in our office doing an application. So
Yeah.
we don't hire any online hourly people, mostly for health and safety and every other reason you could think of.
Right.
But which is, why I don't understand all these agencies that are popping up now that are on an app, so you can sign up, you become an employee on an app, and then the customer orders someone on the app, and then that person accepts it and shows up. This seems to be the new hourly thing that we're competing with. So, the clients that we have right now, that's definitely something that they don't want. So
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how it's successful, but it's getting pretty huge right now.
And that's the key in your differentiator is like where's the human element? Where's that real human connection, that real
Even the liability, like, you know, selfishly, we think of it on a liability standpoint. How are
Mhm.
they getting them to do the health and safety, getting them to, you know, read all our policies and human rights and ESA and everything else, and, you know,
And are they actually a
REMIS,
real
everything.
candidate, right? So there's
Exactly.
liability, there's reliability, and there's ability. Like there's all of it. Like what
Yeah.
is the candidate actually? Are they actually representing who they truly are? So I do believe 100% there is very much a place for the industry, right?
So do we, yes. Yeah.
And that is a key differentiator to be selling to the client is you can use those tools, but our
Yeah.
difference is we're actually putting an actual face-to-face. We're actually having the conversation. We're actually getting to know if that person's really going to be a good fit. So you don't waste your time. There's a huge cost to a poor hire.
Mhm.
And our job is to try to help mitigate that risk. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. Okay. So just a variety of assessment tools that come into play here. Right, obviously the screening and again, I do appreciate you know, that there's so many different ways and different formats that everyone uses, but these are just so basic, like the resumes, they fill out an application form for us or for the client, or their pre-interview questionnaires. I know it was something that I used to send out quite often was pre-interview questionnaires, but again, I was running more of a perm desk, more senior, mid to senior level position, so I would get them to really go through that pre-interview. And if those candidates refuse to fill it out, I may not interview them because I really only wanted candidates that were actually invested. If they can't respond back to a few questions before they come to meet with me, I don't know how serious they are. Again, time is precious and we want to protect our space and our time and our energy. So I feel like some of these tools, like, will they fill out a questionnaire? Again, that telephone screen, web-based information, reading and scoring by recruiter. So that's often more like that matrix or that rubric. And I could show you an example of that rubric, but again, not every company uses that, but it's more sometimes our company's internal recruitment departments use these rubrics. When we've submitted candidates to them, they're going through their process, they have their own candidates, they have candidates from other recruiters, and they might have their own matrix or rubric. And so I wasn't even aware of that until I started doing a little bit more research into recruitment and selection itself and recognizing that, oh, some of my own internal clients use that. So then I started to ask them, when you're going through the process, in addition to the information we sent to you, do you have a rubric that you're measuring our candidates versus your candidates versus other firms' candidates to assess that? And they were like, well, yeah, actually we do. Excellent. What are some of those things, that rubric I need to be aware of? So I just thought that was sort of an interesting insight to understand that some of the more internal processes within recruitment or HR teams and recruitment teams may use. Okay, so this is all going to sound very repetitive and as gentle reminders of the things you probably already know, but when you're receiving resumes, there's certain things that we're wanting to keep in mind. And the one in the yellow is probably the most important one, is the no discrimination. Go ahead.
No, I was just chuckling.
On that one being the most important one?
That is the most important one.
At the end of the day, right? Okay, so why did they change jobs? How long have they lasted in each job? Is there a long gap in employment? Why, right? Maybe I went back to school to get my whatever degree or my diploma or my certificate or health or whatnot. Job hopping. Again, we're not making assumptions. Maybe they were contract, but their resume doesn't clearly state that they're contract worker. So we make an assumption. Oh, wow, this person's a real job hopper. They must not be able to stick anywhere. But maybe they just don't know how to write a resume and they don't have it on there that it's contract or temp. And so it looks like they're a job hopper when actually that's just their thing. Lack of career progression doesn't necessarily mean anything wrong. Just because they don't progress doesn't mean they didn't want to climb the ladder. They were happy with status quo. So again, so as we receive that, it's really looking at it within a really objective lens, but not being so narrow focused, looking at the whole picture, right? This is about getting candidates. We want to open up that, not the pool of candidates, but our matrix of candidates and having good quality candidates at the ready. And so education, right, looking at that, but then again, that discrimination factor. So it's really, really important that we're keeping that so in mind. And again, looking at if we have clients that are requesting certain things. I've had clients that have asked the craziest things. I walked out of a client's job order interview because of the request. The client, I was had a candidate or a new recruiter, and she was shadowing me. And so we went to this client meeting, and the client gave me a detailed description on what this female sales rep needed to look like. And like down to the wire. And I basically just said, you know what, I'm really sorry. I don't think we're the right firm for this. I wish you all the luck. And I got up and I walked out. And I educated them on the why, but that new person was like, can we do that? Can we just like fire a client? I'm like, you better believe it.
Mhm.
If the client is asking things that are strong signs of discrimination and human rights issues, I am not doing anything. I don't care about the job order getting that placement. I care about doing the right thing. So I put that one in yellow because I think that's really important. Has anyone had experience like that where you've been asked of things by a client that is clearly crossing a line?
Well, closest we've had is a couple of our clients, they'll have the supervisor request, and this would be the hourly employee, and they would ask for a man.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because it's heavy lifting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in that case, we, had to, visit our contact at the customer and kind of, not to really get them in trouble, call it ignorance, call it old school,
Mm-hmm.
asking for that type of worker. I said, we'll put the right candidate in place, but you need to just tell us what the job is. And we'll make
Yeah.
sure the right person gets the
And-
job.
Right.
And I
And
mean
you're right.
it's a tough one, right?
Mhm.
Because the reality is 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a male because that's who could physically do that job. But we had to kind of correct how it was presented. And it wasn't, I wouldn't even say that that person was doing it intentionally. It's just they definitely used the wrong choice of words, especially when you're putting it in writing. So
Yeah.
that was
No,
kind of the most
100%.
awkward one we've had, but nothing that you had to deal with where you had to walk out, that's for sure.
And that's where we're looking at like bona fide occupational requirements. So that's where the BFOR really comes in.
Mhm.
And so you said something, sometimes it's educating the client on,
Yeah.
There could definitely be females that could lift 50 pounds. Like, and so it's the educating them on certain things. But I've had
Yes.
requests, I don't want anyone in childbearing years, like all sorts of things.
Oh yeah, that's
It's like,
insane.
We,
you know,
we just had a job where they were looking for a permanent placement, and we've put in a few people with them before, and my mom had, and I sent them 4 really good candidates, and I got an email back saying they don't want to interview any of them. They said they're not interested in any of them, and all they were doing was making an assumption off of their name. So I mean, up here, we struggle with race a bit,
Mm.
and I find that frustrating, and and it's just defeating, and I'm still upset about it. And we ended up not doing a placement. They found someone on their own, and we were quite happy with that. But I just found that really, really disheartening. And I still keep talking to my mom about it. And I was like, they're good quality people in the community. And I'm just, I'm kind of disgusted by their response. So that's the only thing I've had to face.
And that's probably a very, very common thing that, yes, and it's really unfortunate. And so part of that too is why I do believe in a job order meeting is if we have that meeting is to really be able to break down those barriers and managing those expectations out of the gate. and how you do that delicately, you know, but it's important to recognize that. So yeah, so we don't want to be discriminating, and we don't want to be working with clients necessarily that are doing that either. Sometimes it comes down to just real education, but that's important for them.
Yeah.
And so for us, finding the most qualified candidate, sometimes we are dealing with identifying red flags in a resume. You know, resumes are by design, right? Very personal documents. That again, like you said, Kevin, or it was Rudolph that said about using AI with resumes. They can take a job description, they can take their resume and say, create me a resume that fits this job description, and boom, there's that resume. The same thing that could be happening with those apps. If people are hiring by an app, how do they know that that's actually really what they can do? So this can lead to a lot of ambiguity. And so a lot of the things that we're thinking about in a resume when we're screening candidates is like, what's on their resume? Do they have the gaps? Do they have those things? Do they have, like, are there certain signs or indicators of red flags within a resume? And so what could be an example of some red flags that you may see?
Were you asking me that? Sorry.
Or just anyone?
Yeah.
Oh, just anyone. You know, I think that job gaps are a big thing. Job gaps, or like you said, finding where they have their positions and then showing their qualifications and their skills, and they don't match kind of the roles they've had.
Yeah.
We see some of that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they're red flags, but it gives you doubt when you see like spelling mistakes. They don't really care about their resume, what they're sending in. So you're kind of saying, well, listen, did you take the time? They get their place of work wrong or their schooling wrong, and you kind of think twice, well, is it true or not?
Yeah, right. Sometimes lots of spell. Like if there's one little typo, like, okay, we're only human, but if it's quite extensive, they just slapped a resume together quickly. How serious are they?
Incorrect dates.
Incorrect dates, overlapping dates.
Don't line
without
up together.
explanation, right?
Mhm.
Incorrect dates, overlapping dates. Again, maybe some people legitimately had overlap in jobs, but no dates, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of things that we're just really keeping in mind when we're going through that process. And so some of the key things that I wanted to mention, so we've got the resumes and we're looking and we're getting ready to, you know, kind of see what this candidate's all about. So we're looking at these key factors. Do they have the skills? Meaning, can they do the job, right? Bare minimum, can they do the job? But do they also have the capability? So how well can they do the job? Because we're identifying which candidates can offer what. So if they have the skills, that's the basic at the end of the day. Don't bring me candidates, Kevin or Rudolph or Stacy, unless they have these skills, right? These are the obvious. They need the technical requirement to do the job. They may not have every single bit of skill. This is where that finding that 7 to 8 out of 10 candidate is good, to keeping that in mind. But also it's understanding their capabilities. So if I have 5 candidates and the client only wants to see 2, which one of the candidates who have all of these skills have the capabilities? So how well can they do the job? So they have the skills, but which one can do them better? And then the other thing is the motivation, right? Why do they want a new role? Why do they want that role? Why are they interested in that company? Why would that be the right thing for them over another thing? If they're currently employed, why would they quit their job for this one? If they're currently on contract, why would you, people leave their contract to go to this? Why would you turn down an extension of your contract to do this, right? So it's the motivation. And so for all of these, can they do the job? How well they can do the job, or why do they want this new role or this job? Which one of these ones would you say is the most important factor if you had to consider one?
I would say capabilities,
Okay.
because you can learn a skill, and motivation, you never know. That's always a guess if they're motivated or not. But if someone's capable,
Okay.
And I think I think he's right, capabilities. I think motivation is a big thing to how motivated are they to get in the role and learn the role, ask questions, and and adapt to how they need to for that role.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of people are more hands-on, so some of those skills can be taught. But motivation, I think there's a lot of people that lack motivation, which unqualifies them.
Yeah. So 100%, you want them to have the capabilities. And when you mention Rudolph, we don't know about the motivation. Well, as a recruiter, that is our job, is to try our very best to uncover that. So the number one of these three is the motivation. Because at the end of the day, we could have candidates who have the best skills in the world. They could be the most capable of all the candidates that are out there, right? They have the skills, they can do the job, they have the criteria. Maybe they're a 10 out of 10, maybe their capabilities are like off the charts. But if they're not motivated for that job, if they're not motivated to make a change, if they're not motivated to quit their current job, if they're not motivated to turn down another contract, if they're not motivated to extend a contract that they're on, or to turn down, or if they're not motivated for your job, I should say, it doesn't matter. You can't squish a square peg into a round hole and force them to take your job. Or even, so at the end of the day, if they're not motivated towards what you're offering them, they can go through the process. We could say, you never know, just meet with our client. You never know, just come in and meet with us. And sometimes it works in our favor. But at the end of the day, if they just really aren't that motivated, then how successful are we? So motivation becomes a really, like that career wound. What is their pain point? What hurts, right? Why? Some people, if they're unemployed, maybe that's what hurts, but okay. What would motivate you to choose one job over another? If I had 3 jobs in front of you, what would make you pick one over the other? Right? So it's understanding what's behind it. Does that make sense a little bit?
Yeah.
So these factors, great. But if without this, it's like you can lead the horse to the trough, but you can't force it to drink the water. Well, I took you to the trough, but you never asked if I was thirsty. Okay, got it. So thinking a little bit around that idea of motivation is important. So when we look at assessing our candidates, we're looking at that again, the skills. Often clients are seeking to employ skilled individuals. I would say more than often is they want that this is the most basic assessment for you. Do they have the skills? Right? At the end of the day, what are they? That's where you go through the resume. You go through your interview with them. You understand how good are you compared to others in that job? What's the proof that you have these capabilities? What is the actual proof that you're capable? Just telling me you're capable isn't enough. What is the proof? Maybe it is a good quality reference check that can prove it. Maybe it is demonstrating projects that they've completed. Maybe it is demonstrating for some career growth. Maybe it is demonstrating certificates that they've accomplished, right? So we want that, but that motivation, the most important, what appears to be a perfect candidate backs out of a process or turns down a job, right? How painful is that? You've done all this. Right? Getting good at this will put you at the significant advantage over your competitors and save you a lot of time. What is your guys' thoughts around that idea?
It makes sense. I can think of a couple of situations where the motivation wasn't there and the placement didn't work out. So,
Yeah. And maybe they just weren't that motivated. Some people might just go through the motions, some may not. Again, when it comes to other things like the capabilities, right? You can assess their capabilities. You could ask them like what on a scale of 1 to 10, or give me an example of the projects you've worked on. Which ones did you lead? Right? If they say that they're a 10 out of 10, maybe ask them to give you like, what is the proof? Challenge them. I always challenge. I dealt with sales candidates mostly, so I could challenge like the heck out of them. Like,
yeah.
if you can give it to me, if you're gonna dish it out, I'm gonna ask you for the hard questions. So the proof. But when it comes to motivation, though, this is where we're trying to understand, what does that look like? So asking them, what are you looking for in an opportunity? What else? What else are you looking for? What else are you looking for? Why are you looking for change? And what else? Why else are you looking? What are the things that are important to you? And what else? What else would you add to the list? If I had 3 jobs for you in the same vicinity, paying the same money with equal prospects, how would you decide which one to accept? So really delving into a little bit. And that idea again is that valid career wounds, or pain points or motivations. What do they have? So are there any questions that you think that you're currently asking people to understand this? Like, what is that real root of that motivation? Other than why are you looking for change? Because that's a starting point. That's a conversation opener, but that's not necessarily getting really underneath it. Again, this goes back to protecting your time and your energy and your resources. What kinds of things can you be asking? Or in addition to that, what are some of the valid wounds that you think they may bring to the table?
Things they didn't like in past positions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether it was compensation or culture.
Okay, so maybe the culture, the compensation. What other things can be considered a really like a wound, a valid wound for them?
Lack of leadership in their past roles
Lack of leadership in their past or their current role?
or their current role. Advancement.
Advancement, so culture, advancement, poor leadership. What other things do you look for in a candidate when you're trying to understand if there are actually valid wounds or valid reasons for change? For some people, it could be the commute is too far.
Oh, yeah.
For
I
some
was
people,
gonna say, yeah, geographical, yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
geography.
Mhm.
Maybe someone who has to take the bus isn't on a good bus route. They have to walk 30 minutes just to catch a bus or a train.
Work schedule.
The schedule,
Hybrid.
hybrid, yes. Some people don't want to work hybrid. They want to work only in the office. Some people don't want to work in the office at all. They only want remote. Some who's fully remote would prefer hybrid, like, right? All of those things can be a factor. For some, depending on their job, could be too much travel in a job. For some people, it could be too much on the road. Like when I was a sales, like before my career, I was in pharmaceutical sales and I was constantly driving across like every nook and cranny of this province. Maybe some people don't want like the function of the job. For some people, maybe they're stagnant. They feel that there's no room for growth. They are not utilizing their skills to their fullest. So there's a lot of reasons, but it's good to understand that. And
Hours of the job. Did we say
hours,
that already?
yeah,
Some people, I've had people that just, their days are too long. They're just not interested in that.
could be too long, or they don't want to do a 7:30 start and end at 3:30. They'd actually rather work around their kids, like drop them off at school, go to work and, right?
Mhm.
So it's thinking so it's thinking a lot around like, what is it really rather than, well, I'm just looking for a change. And I remember when I was a rookie recruiter, I used to call candidates like, oh yeah, I'm open to change. I'm like, awesome, come on in and meet me. Like there was no deeper. I was like, yeah, I got a live one. Take him down the process, get him in front of the client, spend all the work, and then they turn the job down.
Mhm.
And the pain that goes into that, right? Or fall off. That's even more painful when they just don't work out there. It doesn't work. So just thinking about some of those things and deepening that conversation. Other things that we're considering is like determining the fit. So there's things that we're considering is how do we determine the fit? So maybe it's the person to the organization and the person to the job. Is that person a good fit for the job? So we know the job criteria and what's required. We know the candidate's experience and their skills. And is that a good fit? So that's one part. Can they do the job? Right? Can they actually be successful in that job? But then the other part is, can they work well in that organization? And so that was going back to earlier conversation around how well do we know the company in our best of ability? Sometimes we're working with a new client. We don't know that. But what can we do? How do we understand the organization's culture? How do we understand maybe how those values align with our candidates? Maybe some of our candidates like a dynamic work culture where everyone's working together in the office and it's really social and they're bridging those connections. Maybe some much prefer to work for a company where they are just behind a computer all day and that's it. They don't want to communicate with people. Maybe some like the Google, that vision that we all have. We know at one point we'd have a Google of people rollerblading and roller skating all over the whatever, right? Pinball machines, and like some people like that. So do they fit? So this person here might work really well at this company, but maybe culturally speaking, they're like, I just don't know if that's going to work for me. And some it doesn't matter. Some it doesn't matter for the type of job that they're looking for, where it may not really, really make a difference. But it's important that we understand that from our candidates and we understand from our clients so that we are making that right fit. And so when we're interviewing candidates, an important part of it, Rudolph, do you want to read this? What's important for us to be keeping in mind?
As a third-party recruitment professional, your ability to identify and screen candidates is a large part of the service that a client is looking for when they engage with a recruiter. There is a surprising number of agency recruiters who fail to interview their candidates properly. Getting good at this creates genuine opportunities to stand out from your competitors.
Thank you. And so when it says recruiters who fail to interview candidates properly, what comes to mind when you think that? What kind of comes to mind for you when you say that agencies fail to interview their candidates properly?
Not asking the right questions,
Okay,
not
so
getting the
asking
right
questions.
information from the candidates.
Right, so taking too much at face value, right?
Mhm.
Not digging underneath and deeper and asking like the hard questions. What else?
Not meeting them personally, whether teams or in person.
Right, not meeting them. Like not actually putting a face to a name. And I remember when I started in the industry, I was managing Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And we just never traveled to Saskatchewan to interview our candidates. So it was like all of that, right, was phone driven, right? So it was all of that was a phone oriented for many of us, right? When we were getting started in this industry, it was purely phone driven if they weren't in a position to come into your office. And I remember I was always like, I have no idea. I have no idea who's going to show up in front of my client. You can't ask them for a photo. Like that doesn't fly. That was before LinkedIn or Facebook. You can't see even, so you never knew. You just kind of hope like a hope and a prayer that they come in and they present well, they showed up professionally, right? You just don't know those things. And you also couldn't, aside from that, you also couldn't really build a connection with that person where you start building a sense of trust and a sense of relationship with that candidate and a sense of where they feel that they can be transparent with you. And so, yeah, so I love that, right? That at the end of the day, if we don't bother interviewing our candidates face to face or having a conversation, how many recruiting companies are in such a rush to be the first one to get that resume in front of that client, to get their timestamp on it so that it's their candidate, that they fail to skip this process? Have you guys ever experienced that? Where you've submitted candidate to a company or you've reached out to a candidate and they're like, oh, I already got submitted by so-and-so. Oh, okay. When did you meet with them? Oh, I've actually never met with them. What? Has that ever happened to anyone? Right.
Not that I know of.
No, but I could see it happening. Like there are times that, yeah, you want to get your candidate in as fast as possible. So I
Yeah.
could see that being an issue for sure.
Something
Yeah.
we struggle with here is like my mom used to let some companies advertise on their own as well as she would advertise the role, and she would just hope that she would beat them to it, to
Mhm.
finding someone. And it's a bit tricky because they never signed a contract or anything. And so we would have to ask them to share the applicants who they're shortlisting, just to make sure we're not getting the same people. So, I mean, I'm trying to change this policy moving forward because I don't think it's a valuable use of our time if they're looking on their own. But here, because we have a small amount of candidates or applicants, sometimes companies get the same resumes that we get. And so we have to make sure there's no overlap.
Yeah, thank you for that. 100%. Every time I took a job order, I would explain that to them. Like, in order for us to move forward, I would love to be able to already obtain a list of the candidates you've already interviewed or screened so that we don't overlap our efforts. And I was very matter of fact. Some of the companies would still be like, yeah, not a chance. But some were like, yeah, I understand. But I explained why. That as a consultant, I don't want to waste our time. I want to get you the right candidates fast. So in part of our and I always said, this is just a part of our process. So
Yeah.
it was not like oh my God, will you give me your list of candidates? But as the next step in our process, we
Yeah.
obtain a list of the candidates. So that's great. Thanks for mentioning that. So when we're thinking around some of those things, so these are the things that we're keeping in mind. Now, when we look at interview styles, we're going to go through some of these styles fairly quickly, is we're looking at the difference of interview styles. So some are unstructured and they run an interview like they're a pinball in a pinball machine where they're bouncing all over the place. So recommendation is always to have a well-structured interview. And so when you're thinking around, like I asked the question, do you have job order forms to make sure you're asking the right questions and that you don't forget to ask the important details, right? In a structured interview, you're asking the right information. Every candidate's getting evaluated equally for the same job so that it's not just an off the cuff. Again, when I started, before I had any formal training, I would have my good old resume, right, printed out, and I'd be scribbling notes on all corners of the resume, like flip the resume over, notes everywhere. And so then from the one candidate to the next, the questions weren't being evaluated accurately to really measure. If I had an ABC matrix that I want to know, who am I actually sending forward? And it's not just based on the candidate I like. It's not just based on the candidate or a kid goes to the same school and we share a commonality, so I like them. It's based on what can they actually do based on their skills, their capabilities, and their attributes and their motivations, and measuring them equally. So the unstructured approach, many will do it still. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's hard for us to be able to really identify if one candidate compared to the next is really the one that should be presented. You interview, screen 10 candidates, you're presenting 3, potentially, depending on the kind of role it is, right? So often this is the kind of interview that starts off, well, so tell me about yourself. And then you just kind of walk through the resume, but nothing is really a fair side-by-side comparison. Whereas a more structured style interview is where and again, this is just an example of an evaluation interview form. Does anybody here, or if you have recruiters in your team that's doing more of the interviewing, does anyone use an interview form? Like it's well structured, you're asking the same set of questions. It doesn't have to feel robotic. It doesn't have to feel like you're interrogating them, but it feels like there's structure in place so everyone is being measured equally. It's apples to apples, not apples to oranges in terms of your comparison. Do people use these types of formats? Whether it's an actual paper document or it's built into your CRM system?
We don't have a form like that right now. Right now, we're unstructured.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like it. My mom was very casual, like to meet people and, get a feel for them. And she's always done a good job at that. But for me, I like structure and I like having the questions. Same thing. It's to evaluate them. So we are adapting an interview questionnaire that will go through and assess them because that's not our process right now.
Yeah, interesting. And thanks for sharing that. And again, like I'm so much about forms. So if there was anything that anyone in my company knew about me and my training over the years, there was forms. So there's 2. If you get rid of all your forms, keep 2. Job order form, candidate interview form. It's the 2 most important parts of the whole process. Knowing the job, knowing the candidate, making a match. And you want to have, it's so easy to forget to ask the important details if we don't have forms.
We have one job form that all of our applicants fill out and it's like 7 pages and it has the breakout for all of our admin roles. Are you experienced in multi-line switchboards, blah, blah, blah. So it has 1 out of 5. So they go through this. It takes them about 20 minutes before our interview.
Mhm.
And they go through and do that, and then we ask them questions off of that. But I want to kind of narrow it down to something more structured and kind of get away from that format.
Yeah, yeah.
I would add in my previous, and now with Manpower, but we had the structured interviews, but we also let at least a certain section for other things that might pop up. So you keep the same structure, but if say you're talking about whatever, some experience, say, oh, this is something new, so you can expand something and not just be focused, and you might
Yeah,
find something interesting during an interview. And
100%. So yeah, like you don't want it to be so like, you don't want them to be like, wow, I'm feeling like, but
basic, but
it's having that free flowing. Like you can start off with the tell me about yourself and what brought you to, having the pleasantries, not just getting right down to business. You want to build that relationship. And then saying, okay, now I'm going to move to more of a formal part of the process. Want to make sure that I'm asking you all the right questions at the end, right? Is there anything else that we haven't covered? What else should I know? 100% root off. Yeah, definitely want to incorporate that. So just thinking about that structure is what allows to have more of that, making sure that we're hitting the key points so that candidates are being compared equally and fairly, so that we're not missing out the important details. And then those free flowing other parts that's where you learn a little bit more about their personality, you know, a little bit more about them as a person, right? But making sure that the comparisons. And so when we have the structure, even though we may interview numerous candidates each week, it is still important to acknowledge the need for good structure and follow it. Structure gives us a greater opportunity for consistency and accuracy. One of the downfalls of doing something frequently can become complacency, and especially well-experienced recruiters, right? Where it's like, they're like, oh my gosh, I have become complacent over the years. So when we deviate from that structure, we do potentially miss vital information that can cost us the deal. It can cost us the deal. And then just the process again, just so basic, we're not even going to go through it, but again, some who have more of that formal structured approach don't have to follow this to the letter, but introduction, setting the agenda, opening questions, getting to know each other, digging through their skills. Okay, now I know your skills. Well, how capable, how good are you? What's the proof? Right? You might ask behavioral style questions. What are they looking for? I mean, this is so basic stuff. Compensation, tell and sell. You're telling them about a job that you have for them. You're selling that opportunity to them if there's a job that makes sense for them. What questions do they have? And then disclosing. So I just put this in here because there is a process, like a methodical process. If you're Stacey, looking at creating a job interview form or a candidate interview form, right? There could be a bit of that flow that can work.
Yeah.
Just very quickly, some of the things that I like to mention is because a lot of our clients and the companies out there are utilizing behavioral and situational style interviewing, I do think it's a great idea to throw in a couple of those when you interview candidates, because you want to know how will they respond to that? How will they fare in that? If they don't know what a behavioral interview style interview question might be, it may really throw them off guard when they're interviewing with their clients. So I always intentionally would throw in a behavioral interview question or two, so that I knew that if they really struggled in that, when I'm getting them prepared to go meet the client for an interview, if it's a process where they're doing an interview first, not just sort of direct start, then I know how to prepare them and say, you know what, I know when we met, you really struggled with some of these questions. These are called behavioral style interview questions. Here's some examples, some of the things that you may want to think about. And so the behavioral interview is what happened in the past. And these are the ones that that really get candidates thrown off. Like it derails the interview for them at times, is the situational behavioral style interviews, because they just aren't prepared. They think about what's on my resume, but not what did I do? And they don't really come prepared for that. So the past is behavioral. How did they behave in the past? So when did you have a difficult situation, right? How about how you motivated others depending on their role? When did you have to solve a problem with very little guidance? Any problem, no matter what job you're in, there's a problem to be solved, right? My daughter was working at an ice cream shop last summer at the beach. Problem to be solved. The soft ice cream machine stopped working. How do you solve the problem? So no matter what that is, there's things that they've had to solve problems with little guidance. You had to persuade leadership. You had to show initiative. You had a disagreement. When you went above and beyond, whatever. There's like, if they Googled it, there's like the famous 50. If you go on and Google behavioral style interview questions, get them thinking about this. And again, I'm not saying this is going to be relevant for every single candidate you work with and every single job you place a candidate in, but these are just some things to be thinking about. Do you guys ever have those questions that creep up that your clients are asking those, or your candidate calls you after the interview and they're like, wow, they asked me some really hard questions I was not ready for. Has that ever happened?
Not really, no. I got a couple of favorite questions that I ask.
What are they?
I ask them what they're most proud of,
Love it.
and it doesn't have to be work related, it could be personal,
Okay.
you know. I asked them, this is my favorite one though. I asked them, take me through a typical day. How do you start and how do you end your day?
Yeah. And so those are great questions. Those are, I would say, not so much behavioral style interview questions.
No, they're not, but it tells me a little bit about both.
Yeah. And they're good. I love the questions. And what are you most proud of? Or what's the legacy that you want to leave? Like those kind of questions are great.
Mhm.
You get to know about them. But the behavioral one is where they actually have to think about on the job,
Mhm.
what did I do? Right? And it's hard because they're like, they're already nervous because they're in an interview and they're like, yeah, so just coming with some of that. So when I'm interviewing my own candidates, I like to throw a couple of that in. And
Mhm.
I do some contract work for a company now where I'm interviewing a coaching platform, and I interview prospective coaches. Same thing. I'll throw a couple of those in. What would you
Well,
do?
sorry, when I said a typical day, that's what a typical day at work, not,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes it's just getting them to think about the STAR L method. And so
Mhm.
again, if it's relevant for your candidates, if you think this will help some of them, depending on the kind of interview they're going for, not relevant for everything, is getting your candidates to prepare. They can Google this, right? What was the situation? What was the task? What was the action? What was the result? And what did they learn? Is everyone familiar with the STAR L method? Have you heard of this before?
No.
So a really good, and we're not going to spend a lot of time here, it's just more to bring that to your awareness, that a good preparation technique for your candidates before they meet your clients when it comes to behavioral situational interviews. So asking that question. The other one where the STAR L comes into is situational interviews. And situational interviews is what would they do in the future? So behavioral is what was their past action? How did they behave in the past? Situational is how will you behave in the future? And so some of these might be like, your clients might say, well, what would you do if you made a mistake that no one else noticed? Which was interesting. My daughter applied to work at she's only 18. She applied to work at a doggy daycare. And one of the questions that they emailed her was, what would you do if you noticed that a colleague was mistreating another animal? And I thought, oh, that's a situational interview question that they're looking at. Like, what would you do if? Because they want to see how you think. They want to see how you respond. They're assessing, are you a fit for our culture? I already know you have the skills and capabilities because your recruiter told me so. But now I want to know, do you fit in with us? Do you fit our team? Do you fit our people? What would you do if you were asked to perform a task you've never done before? What would you do? What's their strategic thinking? What's their problem solving skills like, is what these questions are asking. What would you do if an angry and dissatisfied customer confronted you? How would you resolve their concern? Does this make sense? So thinking about some of these questions, letting your candidates know that these exist, and these are the ones that always throw them off guard in an interview. These are the hardest ones. It's easy for them to ramble off what they've done on their resume. These are hard. And so if it's relevant, for you guys, I like to weave some of those into my interviews with them so I see how they perform. So before they meet my client, I know if I need to coach them a little bit and give them some awareness to that. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
So I'm just going through some potential roadblocks here. And again, so you'll see in your slide deck that you were shared, that there's some other slides on there that I'm not going through. There's some stuff in there that's more of like, I'm also keeping an eye on the time, but just some things that are more of like a good to know, just to have your kind of your information there. But I really want to spend the time on the more kind of important ones here. But for every candidate we find, there could be a potential roadblock that could prevent us from placing them. So the better we get at identifying roadblocks, the more time we must deal with them, right? We have more time and work towards an outcome. So before I kind of start going to that, so there's roadblocks, and I'm not talking about red flags on a resume now, right? We've already passed the resume stage. We've interviewed them. We've talked about our jobs with them. But what is it that are some of the roadblocks that can prevent us from actually placing them and having a successful outcome? Remember, two objectives. Our objective, a successful placement. Our client's objective, a successful placement. So what can prevent that from happening? What are candidate roadblocks that come up? What do we need to be on our toes about?
I think if they applied for the jobs, if they're,
Yep. Other jobs they've applied for,
or working with another agency.
right? Other jobs they have yet to apply for. So are they working with another agency? Asking them, what jobs have you applied for? Where are you at in that process? Right? Before they meet with their client, where are you at with that process? What's happening? What's new? What's new since we last spoke? What's changed since we last spoke? And assume something's changed, even if you spoke to them yesterday. What's new? I know it might sound like a broken record, but it's my job to know what's changed. Right? Counteroffer. What are some other things? So maybe they get a counteroffer if they're in a current position. Maybe they get a counteroffer to a contract. Maybe they're on contract, but they want to renew and extend that contract, right? So that could be another one. What are other things that we need to be aware of? What do we need to keep an eye on? Because it's not our problem when the candidate says, I'm not taking the job. Like it's not their problem. It's our problem. We haven't asked the right questions. We haven't been asking and really making sure that we're really on top of these things. So many times we're like, well, that candidate pulled the wool over my eyes. How dare they? Well, we're like, but did we ask the questions?
Time commitments, other commitments that they have.
Yeah.
Reasons why they can't do that position, or the work hours don't work.
Yeah, there could be other commitments that they have. Time, the hours don't work. Maybe we never asked them. What do you think about the hours? Well, they never told us. Yeah, but we never asked. We have to assume that we have to assume that they're not going to tell us everything.
Right.
What else can be a roadblock? Contractual issues, restricted covenants. Maybe some of them are on contract somewhere. Maybe there's a non-compete. I've had that, right? Lots of times. Oh, I can't take the job. I just found out I have non-compete and and I gotta, right? So there could be those issues. Contractual issues, maybe the nature of the work itself. They don't like the contract or the nature of the work. Contractual issues, monthly pay. Some people don't want to be paid once a month. Some people need to be paid twice a month. I've had that come up as a roadblock, right? Where they're like, oh, that just doesn't work for me. I can't do that. And there's like nothing our client can do. That's just their payment cycles.
Some of ours are travel to and from. If it's up in camp, they need to find travel to Fort St. John, whether it's flying or driving, and it's just the commute, right? Getting here. If they're located, because a lot of them come from Calgary and the Okanagan area. So
yeah, right. 100% that could be an issue. Notice period. Right. I've had one candidate, you have to give a 3-month notice period. It's like, what? What do you mean 3 months? They need you now. Like, I understand a 4-week notice period. Like, that's okay. Like 2 weeks is your standard if they're employed or if they're on contract somewhere and they're going to break that contract or for whatever the reason. But at 3 months, like I've had that creep up. So we need to know that from the candidate before they get the offer from our client. What notice period do you require? I need to let our client know. Is it the standard 2 weeks? well, it is 2 weeks, but I'm actually going to give 4 weeks and then I want to take 2 weeks off in between. So now we're talking about 6 weeks. Like, does that work? Other things, personal situation, things come up, right? Those things happen. Visa requirements for someone who's maybe, like we've had people in our own company, we've had a lot of people from, we've had a slew of really great people from Ireland, and then they had visa requirements, they had to go back, and like, right, there's issues, like things like that. Do they come up? The commute, right? That commute, that geography, the culture, the environment. They're like, you know what? At the end of the day, I just don't think I'm going to fit into that culture. Well, what do you mean? Like, what are you looking for? Now's not the time to ask them what they're looking for. It's too late. That's too late. Not liking who they meet. Okay. Bonuses are due. I've had people back down because they're like, you know what? It just occurred to me. I have a bonus and I don't want to miss the bonus. And maybe our client will cover that. Maybe they won't. Pension. They realize that the new place that they're going to go to doesn't offer pension. And for them, that's like everything. Skeletons in the closet. Maybe we get really bad references, right? There's bad references that happen that are like really bad. Or we can't get references. The candidate won't even give us names for references. That's another reason why the client might not hire them. So this is just like, if you think about it, there's a lot of things that can come up that can derail a successful placement. So the more awareness we have, we're only going to have this awareness if we're asking these questions of our candidates. Does that make sense? We put way too much stock into thinking they're going to tell us, but we have to be the ones to ask. Any questions on that? Okay. So for the last 20 minutes, we're just going to quickly go through, and there's only a handful of slides on this, not a lot here, but on testing, checks, and references. And so when we're taking a look at like all the different sources, and again, it's so important that we are following through, finding out, number one, what the client is looking for. What are their processes? Like you had said, Kevin, in some cases, one client you have to do testing before they even like start anything. Some clients will do testing at the end. Some clients, the testing is just kind of like, we do the testing, but we don't rely on it 100%. It's just more of a nice to have or a nice to know. Or some are like, nope, if that assessment is like not 100% to the mark, we're not even going down that path. I've had some where if they do like these ridiculous Wonderlic tests, where they're like these IQ tests, like, crazy puzzles and stuff like this. And if they don't pass it, that's it. They don't move on. They could be from their direct competitor from years of experience, super great. But if they don't pass that test, it's done. And so despite all of our like, hey, like, is this really required to go through that process? So there's a lot of different things that we're looking at. But when we're looking at background investigation and reference checks, there's so many different sources of information that we're looking at, right? Former employers, current supervisors, commercial credit rating companies, some clients, depending on the role, written references. I don't know how many written references we get these days, but social networking sites, right? A lot of companies, that becomes a part of it, right? That's a whole check now, is looking at their social networking site. So there's different sources of information, and it is a necessary part of the process. And the selection process is that reference checking. You are doing both yourself and our clients. I'm not saying you, but just generally in our industry, we're doing a disservice to ourselves and to our clients if we're glossing over the need for references. And yes, sometimes references can be glowing because that manager happened to also be their friend. So we're trying our best, but when we're looking at the reference check system and process, that and it depends too, but we are putting ourselves, we're exposing ourselves and leaving ourselves for a lot of room for things to go wrong if we haven't validated this part of the process. Have you taken that that course yet with Steve Jones, where he talks about what went wrong with certain organization? It was Drake versus, I think, something treaty group, where the Drake International didn't do reference checks on a candidate to only find out if they had done proper reference checks, as was stated in their contract with the treaty group. Can't remember, it was treaty something. That they would have discovered that that candidate had already done other fraudulent activity and ultimately had stolen somewhere like $100,000 from the company that they were placed at. But had they had done the reference checks, they would have known that, and that candidate would have never been placed. So the whole thing went to court. This was many years ago. The whole thing went to court, and the court deemed both Drake International and Treaty Group at 50-50 at fault. So Treaty Group was suing Drake International for not doing reference checks, but they were both at fault. Drake didn't follow through on their commitment to doing the reference check. Treaty Group didn't follow through on asking for the reference check. So they were both 50 at fault. And so if your process does not currently require reference checks, I would highly encourage it. And again, doesn't mean it's the only source of what's 100% true of that candidate, but especially if it's in your contract with that client, we need to do them. We need to cover ourselves. What are some of the protective measures that you take to make sure that you are protected currently? What are some of the things that you guys do to really protect yourself from issues like that?
Well, our agreements have, and they're all different. Some of them, you know, even our hourly people, more and more companies want criminal background checks done. So
Yeah.
whether they pay for it or we do, usually we pay for it. So it's just written right into their contract. And then with the perm agreements, the same thing. Like we just signed a new one last week, and our client made a couple of changes to it. But you know, I know what they're responsible for, and they know what we're responsible for.
Yeah, 100%. And then we got to follow through.
Mhm.
I have interviewed so many recruiters over the years. When I ask them some of these questions, it's like, no, our company, we don't bother with reference checks. It's a waste of everybody's time. And it's like my jaw hits the ground. I'm like, what?
Well, we have a couple of clients that they don't care if we do them, but I have that in writing that they don't want them done. They figure, you know, and it is kind of true. A lot of references these days, you don't really get an accurate one, or if you get one at all, or you know, you're not really talking to the right person, or even our own policy for our company now is we'll confirm employment. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's that too. But I know with even when we have a client, and I know one of the things that some of our recruiters did, even when we had a client that said we don't need them, they would just do one just for their own peace of mind.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
again, doesn't mean that it's going to be the right reference.
Mhm.
If the candidate can't provide names for us, and sometimes it's enough to ask the candidate, who are your references? And if they can produce that quickly, like here was my manager and here was this and here was that, sometimes that's enough to know, okay, but what about those candidates who refuse to provide a reference? I don't have any, they retired, or like they give you every excuse under the sun on why they can't provide you that reference. To me, that's a
Mhm.
mega red flag, right? So I just want to get that list, and at least I know. But if I have to fight with the candidate to get me a reference, I'm pretty
We
feeling.
usually ask for them in the process. It's almost one of the first things, like even during the phone interview, you know, I might even throw it in there, you know, especially if they're not working. If they're working, you know, they're still working there, so it's not as big of a deal. But yeah, if they haven't been working in 6 months, it raises that question, why haven't they been working in 6 months?
Yeah, very
We,
much so.
we also have on our questionnaire that they fill out, are there any companies you don't want us to send your resume to? And so we find that there are some candidates or applicants that put a lot of local companies. And then you think, well, if they don't want to work there, are they not listed on the resume? Right? Like you tend to question that.
Yeah.
And that there's some background there that's not being shared properly.
Yeah, right. How do you, yes, and sometimes it's that gut check. You're like,
Yeah.
right? And if there's usually a gut check, it's usually right.
Mhm.
If there's a reason why they're hesitant or they just can't produce a name to get a reference, sometimes it's like, okay, how am I going to just get this person in front of the client and place them just because I need to? Or are we going to kind of, right? Every situation will be different, but other things, other areas too, is looking at all sorts of employment testing. So those aptitude tests, like that Wonderlic, where it was just, it blew my mind where they had to write like, can you fill in this puzzle? Or how do you, X means Y and Z? And it's like, they're applying to become a sales rep at a building supply company. So they do these things, but sometimes it's asking the client. And so that we are well aware ahead of times, and we can also manage our candidates' expectations. So these certain tests, do you live and breathe by them? Is it just a good to know and a nice to know and a nice to have? Or will any of these rule that candidate out completely? We need to know that if this is part of their process. I like to manage candidates' expectations going into it, and I want to manage my own expectation and the client's expectation. And so I would manage. So what I started doing with that particular client is I'd say to the client, you know what, before you even go through this whole process with a candidate, before you even interview the candidate, before they drive down to your site and they get all ready, can I just give them the Wonderlic test first? Like, can we just do that first? Kind of similar to what Kevin, you mentioned, like just do it first.
Yeah.
That we're not wasting anyone's time, mainly in that case, the candidate's time. Personality tests, some companies have all sorts of different kind of personality tests, skills tests. There's a variety of different things, but work samples. So in some cases, I've seen work samples, like if I'm using the sales example where they had to put together a 30, 60, 90-day business plan, or if it was a marketing candidate, put together, share their portfolio, or if it was a work sample on whatever that might look like. Pivot tables. Sometimes people have to do like Excel testing and make sure they can provide that they can do the actual administrative duties that they claim that they can do. But the big one that we really want to keep an eye out for, again, in the courses that you would do with Steve Jones, this would probably come up more, is that bona fide occupational requirement, those physical tests. And so, Stacey, do you want to read off what a bona fide occupational requirement really is?
It's a procedure used to defend a discriminatory employment practice or policy on the grounds that the policy or practice was adopted in an honest and good faith belief that it was reasonably necessary to ensure the efficient and economic performance of the job without endangering employees or the general public.
Yeah, thank you. So according to the Human Rights Code, to conduct a test of this nature, a bona fide occupational requirement must be established for a physical or medical ability test. And so there's certain, examples, right? Testing allowed after conditional, like there are some exceptions. Maybe there's certain types of testing allowed after conditional offer of employment made in writing, or applicants have been informed before that there's conditional testing. I know we had one candidate, he was applying to work for, I think it was a pharmaceutical company, and he flew out to Quebec for the interview because there's a lot of the big pharmaceutical companies are based out there. And he went out there, and then he called myself and my colleague. She and I were job share partners at the time, and he was like practically in tears. And he just couldn't believe like all the medical testing and the drug testing and the things that went through. And he was very stressed about it. And so there's different things that come up, and that has to be a bona fide occupational requirement. Certain testing allowed after conditional offer of employment made in writing. And so certain things like the police services, fire service, airline pilots, lifting, carrying. So certain tests really need to be made sure, like that example. I can remember it was Rudolph or Kevin who made that comment about did they prefer to hire men because they have to be able to lift 50 pounds, right? It has to be really bona fide in order for those tests to be even legal. And drug testing is illegal, at least the last I checked, is illegal in Canada. It can only be done after an incident has occurred.
Drug testing?
Mm-hmm.
We do.
Not for
alcohol
drivers, I
testing.
think.
We
Sorry,
do it
Stacey?
before they get sent to the workplace.
So maybe that's changed. So has that changed or is that?
We have to do it for all of our camps.
Hmm.
Oh, so that might be a bona fide occupational requirement though.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
Yeah.
have to have a specific policy and say why you're doing the testing, what you're testing for.
yeah,
And make sure always valid verify. If the client has a policy, fine. But if they just say we're just doing testing for like that, then it's not a.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and so those are, so again, so that could be for those reasons. So we're just keeping that in mind if those things come up with clients. This is all more of a need to know. And so at the end of the day, what are some of the main things, right? So what are the benefits? Sometimes it's getting to know the candidate, maybe it's to screen faster, maybe it's to help increase objectivity, maybe it's to recognize potential, maybe it's to raise red flags, maybe it's to reduce turnover, maybe it's to avoid costly mistakes. But at the end of the day, they're not a guarantee of fit. And so our clients may go through this process. We may have our own processes. Like I know at Applin, we had a lot of, testing, especially for those on the administrative side, like word typing and Excel and all sorts of things. And some had different IT testing and programming and different things like that. But it's not a guarantee of fit. These are all sources of information. These are all sources of helping a client make that decision on who they're selecting, right? That selection process. And so some can be very strict about one red flag and they're out of the process. Some might be like, it's good to know so that we know moving forward. So even though many companies are utilizing a variety of different assessment tools and there's a variety of benefits to it, it's also not that guarantee of fit. And so again, having some of that conversation with the client about really understanding what does that actually look like by doing all of this? Is this a ruling out or is this more of a need to know? Nice to know. So overall, we went through a variety of things today. And again, a lot of it was probably just high level summary and review of things you already are doing. But just different source of information, right? These are all of the things that can help us understand if we're bringing the right candidates forward to the client. So we're not just placing anybody, but we're placing the right people. And it's also to help the clients decide on the right fit. So those resumes, screening resumes, are there red flags? Having a phone screen at bare minimum, application forms, tests and assessments, actually interviewing everybody, not just submitting a resume because we're trying to get a candidate timestamp fast. Profiling, sometimes we profile our candidates with some information, doing references, background checks, work samples. Maybe sometimes it's LinkedIn recommendations that we've come across, past placements that we've already placed that person somewhere that was successful. And now that job has come to an end or that contract has come to an end and we're replacing them. So a lot of different things that we've kind of dug through, again, in high level summary. And hopefully there was enough takeaways for you to kind of get prepared for your exam. But I'd love to know if there was any takeaways from today's session that kind of come to mind, or something that was a refresher, a reminder, a gentle nudge, or something new. Rudolph, how about you?
Well, I'm just laughing a bit because I do employee relations. That's why I don't do recruitment. So it's just all these things you have to put in place, and it's a lot easier on my side. So I'll leave
What's
it for
that?
you guys. I said I leave the recruitment for you guys.
No, but I'm curious though, for you doing employee relations, like this knowledge for all of this, what does that give you?
Well, but like I said, it's a bit scary at the same time because we need to make sure that every step is followed. There is a process because sure, if there's any, on my end, if there's any claims that was there a structured interview or not, or was there something written down that you shouldn't be, questions asked when you shouldn't. So there's a whole bunch of things that like you're saying, more structured. We're sure what they're asking. We verified, we validated, everything is great, and
Yeah.
like that, then that's it. Then doing the structure, we save time. We're an expert for our clients. This is what we need, and like I said, sometimes there's clients that ask something we should stay away from. But
Yes.
it's a whole, recruitment is not just posting an ad, finding someone, say here, you're there, here's a warm body, let's hire. It's more complicated than that.
So
Very.
everything you just said, Rudolph, is exactly to Kevin's comment about these apps that people are applying and why companies need us.
Yeah.
Why? Because recruiting isn't just throwing a resume in front of a client and hoping it sticks. It's really about all of the things, and that's the value that we bring to our companies and that will continue as humans provide to our clients is all of that. And so many of our clients don't necessarily understand all the work that goes into what we actually do, why we demand the fees that we demand, why this isn't just a cheap ticket item, right?
Yeah.
That it's all of that work. And most people, they don't understand the nuances of what actually goes into this. It's a lot to do it right and to do it well and to be ambassadors for our industry. Stacy.
For sure today, part of my takeaway was to create that structure. We need that structure with the interviewing and in the process with that so that we can be more efficient, and we can also learn to qualify people based on the same qualification, reporting and ratings, and be able to give reasons why they would qualify or why we're sending these candidates.
Yeah.
We give a lot of personality and a lot of insight off of some of the sheets that they fill out with us. But you're right. I think some of the behavioral questions and other questions would be good to kind of work in there and have a structure of how we're holding those interviews.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And again, I don't know, sometimes I had a client say, so which one would you hire? Well, if I was
I
like, I
hate
don't know, I've
that.
got, you know,
Yeah.
what's that, Kevin?
I hate that.
Right? And I'm like, well, it's not up to me, it's up to you. But they're like, no,
Yeah,
but you know what? I love that question because that means they trust me. They see
yeah.
me as a consultant at the same time. But it's like if I had like random notes on each of the candidates that were totally different, I'd be like, but if I had like where it was pretty similar, it'd be easier to go back and say, well, let me explain why I would pick this one over that one.
hmm
Kevin.
Well, I think for lack of a better term, a lot of it's common sense what we went through today,
Yep.
and I guess just over the years it's kind of organic. Like you kind of do it, but you presented this in a much more polished way. So there's a few things that I'm going to go visit now and twig and make it a little more structured, as you said. But I definitely got some good information today for sure.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you. And I really, this is the smallest group we've done this with, so I really appreciate this one. I'm like, oh, I like this. It's very interactive, and I appreciate the sharing. And I got a sense there was almost a little bit of coaching mixed in at the training at the same time. So I really appreciate all of your investment and your energy into this. It's what makes it successful. It's not just my words, but it's the collective group's opinions, thoughts, and examples. That's really important. So thank you for that. I wish you all the success. Good luck on your exam. When is the exam? Like when is that?
Good question. I don't know. Do we just sign up for it? I don't know. Do we?
It's a
I
good
have no
question.
idea.
I
That's
don't
Jennifer.
know.
Where's Jennifer?
I thought it was on the 23rd.
Well, the
Of May?
23rd, there's another one of these on the 23rd. Let me see. I've
Oh,
got
is it? Okay.
my next
Oh, yeah.
course is
The business.
business practices on the 16th, and then I've got health and safety with David Wells on the 23rd. And then it just says online challenge exam, but it
Oh,
doesn't say
right.
when it is. So,
Okay.
um,
Yeah, I love the business practices one too. I used to teach that one as well, and that some of the things that we talked about, human rights and bona fide occupational requirements, like there's certain things that really come into that
mhm.
are super interesting as well, and really eye-opening at the same time. So
Yeah, good.
awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Good luck. Feel free
Well,
to
we
connect
should
with
be
me.
thanking you, Jill.
Yes.
Thanks very
Thank
much.
you.
Yeah.
And connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like. And I'm always happy to make connections. So I'm on there. My last name is spelled with a K, Kantor.
Yeah, got it
And
here.
we shall see you potentially on LinkedIn. And good luck on your exams.
Sounds
All
great.
right, Joe.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.